Sunny had been really exhausted after the long battle. However, due to the blessing of spirit and the blessing of flesh, enchantments of the Shroud of Dusk, he only needed a few short hours to recover from the heavy fatigue. He woke up feeling rested and refreshed, but also strangely forlorn. Sunny had not dreamed in a long while, but tonight, he did. The dream had already disappeared from his memory, but the feeling of sorrow and loss remained, pressing at his heart. He let out a sigh.
I actually had a nightmare. Wow, as if the waking world is not nightmarish enough already.
Sunny was in a subdued and contemplative mood. Before falling asleep, he had been thinking about how to use the enchantment of the Mirror of Truth. Now that he had woken up, however, he found his mind drifting to its description. No matter how he looked at it, the conversation between Weaver and Ariel was really too strange, especially the words Weaver had whispered at the end. You wanted to be free of the truth, so you didn't deserve it. Why would the demon of fate, who is known to weave countless lies, admonish Ariel for discarding the truth? Unexpectedly, Sunny thought of the Sin of Solace, not its enchantments and not even its description, but the name of the cursed sword itself. Why was Solace a sin exactly? The description of the Shroud of Graceless Dusk spoke about how the Sibyls found salvation and solace within the tomb of Ariel. However, in the end, they too were destroyed. Dusk had been the last of them. The hideous truth enchantment of the Sin of Solace, meanwhile, was supposed to grant revelations to those who succumbed to madness. Revelations of truth, which Ariel had described as the most hideous thing in the world and the source of cruel torment. So, wasn't Ariel himself the sinner then? He had committed a sin by seeking solace in forgetting the truth. Perhaps Weaver, as a masterful liar, knew the value of truth just as well as the demon of dread, and felt contempt for those who squandered it. Perhaps there was more to this story. Sunny turned slightly and glanced in the direction where Kai was sleeping restlessly. He had never really considered his friend's flaw a heavy one to carry. What was so terrible about knowing when people lied? However, with that knowledge came the knowledge of truth. Kai, just like Ariel, was cursed to learn many things that he would rather not know. Would his friend also be forced to seek solace in oblivion one day? Sunny raised his eyebrow.
Oblivion, huh?
That was another thing. There was the demon of oblivion as well, although that one was hard to remember. Of all the 7 demons, oblivion was mentioned the least. Sunny would have never even known of his existence if not for Noctis, who had mentioned the demon of oblivion once in passing, saying that their name was long forgotten. Just remembering the fact of oblivion's existence was not easy. Noctis, meanwhile, was the one who had helped the Sun Prince erase some memories. The eccentric sorcerer had been close to Adri, the blessed heart god, who was the god of memory as well. Was that why he could remember the demon of oblivion? Shadow God, by coincidence, was the god of solace. Sunny covered his face with a hand and suppressed a frustrated groan.
What a mess.
What was he thinking about?
Oblivion. I was thinking of the demon of oblivion.
Noctis had helped Sun Prince erase a few important memories. But how exactly? Had Ariel retrieved the memories of truth out of his head and hid them in the heart of his tomb? Had he received help from someone as well? An easily forgotten sibling, perhaps. It was a bit suspicious that he had not known the source of his tears when speaking with Weaver. Sunny was not sure, but he felt that there were not 2, but 3 daemons somehow connected to the Black Pyramid. The demon of dread, the demon of fate, and the mysterious demon of oblivion. His theory about the last one, however, was completely unsubstantiated. Maybe it was simply the result of him just dreaming about something he could not remember. Sunny remained motionless for a while. then summoned the Endless Spring and drank some water. After that, he silently sent his shadows out. The emissaries of both valor and song were currently in the camp, so he could not pass up the opportunity to try and glean some of their secrets. As the shadows prowled the army camp, he thought about the searching reflection enchantment one more time and summoned his runes. Sunny had not taken a good look at them in a while. The shimmering symbols ignited in the air in front of him. Name, Sunless. True name, Lost from Light. Rank, Ascended. Class, Tyrant. Shadow Cores, 5 out of 7. Shadow Fragments, 503 out of 5,000. Memories, Silver Bell, Puppeteer's Shroud, Midnight Shard, Extraordinary Rock, Endless Spring, Darkwing, Moonlight Shard, Weaver's Mask, Autumn Leaf, Cruel Sight, Covetous Coffer, Heavenly Burden, Memory of Fire, Memory of Ice, Strike of Thunder, Morgan's Warbow, Shadow Lantern, Bone Singer, Shadow Chair, Overpriced Saddle, Dying Wish, Sin of Solace, Bitter Cusp, Stifled Scream, Weaver's Needle, Essence Pearl, Nimble Catch, Shroud of Graceless Dusk, Mirror of Truth. There were several memories apart from the Mirror of Truth that he had received during the last battle. Sunny studied them for a few moments, then decided that those would be best used as nourishment for Nightmare. Satisfied, he continued to read the runes. Echoes, Shadows, Onyx Saint, Soul Serpent, Nightmare, Ravenous Fiend. Attributes, Fated, Flame of Divinity, Master of Shadows, Bloodweave, Boneweave, Marble Shell. Aspect, Shadow Slave. Aspect Rank, Divine. Aspect Ability, Shadow Control, Shadow Step, Shadow Manifestation. Aspect Legacy, Shadow Dance. Flaw, Clear Conscience, Dream Anchor, Tower of Longing. Sunny concentrated on his shadows. Saint was at a respectable 0 shadow fragments out of 300. That was because he had concentrated on feeding his other shadow after she transcended. Nightmare was still a mere awakened creature, so he could see a class evolution much sooner that way. The Black Destroyer was swiftly approaching that evolution. His runes showed. Shadow Fragments, 179 out of 300. Nightmares required, 734 out of 1,000. Sunny thought for a few moments. Not bad. Then, he did another thing that he had not done in a while. He concentrated on his innate ability and summoned Nef's runes. There had been a time when Sunny studied Changing Star's runes like a man obsessed. His whole life had been built around the desire to overtake her on the path to power. He might have even done a few careless things in that pursuit. At some point, however, Sunny had lost the desire to compare himself to Nephis, at least in this way. The first change happened because of her return from the Dream Realm. The second time in the Antarctic Center, he had lost the habit of summoning her runes every day. Shadow fragments, soul fragments, those were not a true measure of strength anyway. Sunny had seen countless mundane soldiers stand and fight against the nightmare creatures, never surrendering despite the dire disparity of power between them. If those people were weak, then he did not know whom to call strong. And so, at some point, he had stopped paying constant attention to Nef's runes without even noticing it. Now, however, Sunny had the Mirror of Truth, so he decided that it was worth taking another look. The familiar symbols shimmered, forming into strings. Name, Nephis. True name, Changing Star. Rank, Ascended. Class, Tyrant. Soul Cores, 5 out of 7. He stared at that number for a few moments. After years of lagging, Sunny had finally caught up with her. Wasn't it so very funny that he had only been able to do so after stopping caring about the race? A light smile appeared on his face. Whatever. She still has more fragments than I do.
She'll be a terror sooner than me.
But did it matter? In the end, they would both be Titans. That day was not as far away as it had once seemed now. Sunny continued to read. Soul fragments, 2,719 out of 5,000. Nephis had received many soul shards from the treasury of Clan Valor after being adopted by them. However, she could not reveal the fact that she possessed a divine aspect and multiple soul cores. Requesting more than 1,000 would have been strange and aroused suspicion. She had not been hunting down many nightmare creatures while Sunny had been going from one dire battle to another almost every day in the Antarctic Center, so her progress was slow as of late. Now that the changing star had arrived in Antarctica, though, that was bound to change. Sunny wondered how many soul fragments she had received in the recent battle, then turned his attention back to the runes. Memories, Dreamblade, Starlight Legion Armor, Dawn Shard, Darkwing, Nameless Sun. There was a long list of memories. Some of them she had received while wandering the Dream Realm and challenging the second nightmare. Sunny could learn a few things about what kind of trial she had faced from reading their descriptions. But since Nephis did not want to talk about her harrowing experience, he held himself back. Perhaps it was stupid, but he did not want to invade her privacy. He also wanted her to tell him herself. Sunny knew what a precious and fragile thing trust was. It had taken a lot for him to extend his trust toward Effie and Kai. Before that, his friends had respected his desire to remain silent and did not push him to reveal his secrets. He was very thankful for that. Sunny was not a saint, though. He felt no qualms about studying the memories that Clan Valor had provided to Neph. They were incredible memories indeed, no less outstanding than Morgan's warbow, each crafted for the specific purpose of slaughtering nightmare creatures and tailored to the user. He wanted to borrow a few to study their weaves. He just did not know how to phrase that request.
Hey, Neph, could you please take off your armor? I need it for a couple of weeks. No, I won't wear it. Shut up, Effie.
Just thinking about it made him wince. Chasing away the dreadful image, Sunny continued to study the runes. Attributes, Dream Spawn, Nephilim, Flame of Divinity, the Fire. Dream Spawn, Attribute Description. You are born of two worlds, belonging to both, but welcomed in neither. Your soul exists on the edge between nightmare and reality. Nephilim. Attribute Description. There once were terrible creatures born of an unholy union between the divine and the profane. Nephilim were the most beautiful and the most harrowing of them all. Flame of Divinity. Attribute Description. Your soul is a flame with the light of divinity. The Fire. Attribute Description. You have inherited the lineage of Sun God. Those had not changed. Sunny himself had received a couple of new attributes in the past years, but Nephis had not. Neither had she unlocked her aspect legacy, which was not very surprising. Each aspect was unique after all, and possessed unique requirements for acquiring the legacy. Awakened who received their legacies were rare, and most only accomplished the feat after becoming saints, with an even smaller number doing so as masters. Otherwise, there would have been countless legacy clans in the world. So it was Sunny who was an anomaly. He sighed wistfully, thinking of Serpent, and turned back to the shimmering symbols. Aspect, Lightbringer. Aspect rank, Divine. Aspect description. You are a creature of light that was banished and doomed to exist in the darkness. You bring radiance and warmth to wherever you go, but with it comes indescribable longing. Innate ability, half-breed. Half-breed ability description. You can directly absorb a portion of the soul essence of any nightmare creature destroyed by your flame, as well as of any human. Aspect abilities. Soul Flame, Flame Manipulation. Longing. Soul Flame, Ability Description. Your soul burns with the purest of flames. That flame can both restore and destroy, and is both a blessing and a curse. He was perfectly familiar with the first of Neff's 3 aspect abilities. It had grown slightly more versatile since the Forgotten Shore, now augmenting the soul as well, but otherwise remained the same. The other 2 abilities, her awakened and ascended ones respectively, were new. The awakened ability was rather straightforward. Flame manipulation. Ability description. You can bend all fire to your will. That was how Neffis was able to control fire, turning it into her weapon. That fire did not have to be her own, although she could produce flames if there were none around at the cost of feeling terrible pain. The ascended ability, on the other hand, was a bit strange. Longing. Ability description. Your soul is incorruptible. And that was all. Not only was it a passive ability, which was incredibly rare for ascended abilities, it also did not do anything. It did not even raise Neff's protection against soul attacks or improve the rate of her essence regeneration. For all intents and purposes, longing was useless. Of course, Sunny knew a thing or two about the type of corruption the runes spoke of, so he understood how incredibly special that ability was, in theory. In practice, they had never even faced corruption. Sunny did not even know of anyone who knew how corruption happened. All humans were familiar with the nightmare creatures. Against those, having a pure soul was of no help. A pure soul. Sunny sighed and looked at the last string of runes. Flaw, pristine soul. Flaw description. You must suffer to use your power. He lingered for a while, staring at them, and then dismissed the symbols.
I don't think I'll be using the Mirror of Truth on Neffis, unless I'm about to kill a truly powerful nightmare creature, or human, and want to absorb an incredible amount of shadow fragments.
But then again, would it even work? The description of the half-breed innate ability spoke of soul essence, not shadow essence. No, he would have to find better targets. And speaking of better targets, his shadows were already getting close to the emissaries of song and valor. Today, luck was on Sunny's side. Usually he would not have been able to listen in on the really important conversations between the emissaries of the great clans. They were too cautious, and he was very cautious as well. Perhaps he could overcome the defensive measures his targets had in place, but the cost of failure was too great. So he had been reluctant to try. Maybe because of the clamor and pressure of the ongoing clash with the nightmare creatures that had been drawn to the battlefield, the representatives of both song and valor had been slightly neglectful. And since Sunny had already spent a month learning how to get closer to them, he managed to witness 2 very interesting conversations. The first one was between Morgan and Maddock. The 2 members of the Valor family remained in the stone fort on top of the giant Echo's carapace, speaking about something as they observed the constant stream of abominations being ground against the outer perimeter of the camp. Of course, no one could hear what they were saying since the 2 were surrounded by an invisible barrier that prevented any sound from coming out. Even the movement of their lips was obscured. There were memories active that made it almost impossible for someone to divine the conversation as well. However, Sunny was not a diviner. Much more importantly, he managed to get inside the circle of silence by hiding his own shadows in the shadow of one of Valor's awakened. The man had been invited to make a report, and so Morgan herself led him through the layers of wards surrounding the fort. When the awakened arrived, she studied him for a few moments, then asked in a neutral tone, "Is there news, Squire Warren?" The awakened shifted slightly. He tried to hide his excitement at the fact that she knew his name, but failed miserably. Sunny mentally rolled his eyes, while Morgan pretended not to notice. Well, the poor man could not be blamed. How often did ordinary awakened retainers in service of the great clan closely interact with its princess? Very rarely, most likely. Morgan was a striking person as well. Despite her coldness and sharpness, she was someone even Sunny found hard to look away from. There was just something about the young woman and her vibrant vermilion eyes that demanded attention, not to mention the fact that she was quite literally a member of exalted royalty. In any case, Squire Warren did have something to report. He bowed to Morgan and Maddox, then spoke in a deep, respectful voice.
We received word from Knight Stad, my lady. His cohort had survived the second night and secured a fortified position. Their report indicates that the divination seems to have been correct.
At the mention of that last part, Maddox and Morgan exchanged a glance, their expressions subtly changing. Back in the tent, Sunny frowned.
Knight Stad.
He was one of the masters that had arrived with Summer Night. His cohort had been among those secretly sent to search for suitable nightmare gates. It appeared that they were already in the dream realm and had found something important to boot. Morgan lingered for a few moments, then sighed. Finally, some good news. What about the rest of the scouts? Squire Warren looked down and gritted his teeth.
Lost or forced to enter the Seeds, my lady. However, now that we have secured several entry points, the next cohorts we send will survive, honoring their sacrifice.
She nodded. Indeed. At that point, Maddox finally spoke.
The most important thing right now is to reinforce Stad. His mission might very well decide the outcome of this phase of the conflict. Warren, tell your men to prepare. Once we return to the siege capital, I will personally transport you to the desert. You must succeed at any cost.
He lingered for a moment, and then added,
If my niece does not object, of course.
Morgan smiled. Why would I? Squire Warren has a sharp blade, and his comrades are the same. They will bring Clan Valor glory. The awakened man lowered his head, his eyes igniting with exhilaration and zeal.
You honor me, Lady Morgan. Sir Maddox, we won't let you down.
Whispering Blade smiled.
Of course you won't. You are warriors of valor, after all.
Beaming with pride, Squire Warren left. Sunny's shadow, however, remained, which was why it heard Morgan's voice change slightly as she addressed Maddox. Shouldn't we send someone more powerful? Whispering Blade shook his head.
Don't be impatient. It's too early to risk our champions. Once the target is secured, we will have an almost insurmountable advantage over the Blood Daughters. Then we can truly begin.
Morgan looked away and grimaced. I know. It's just that you know what is at stake. She remained silent for a few moments, then smiled. Should we send Nephis then? Maddox's face changed slightly.
Don't even think about it. You know how your father feels about her.
Morgan sighed, then looked in the direction of the battlefield. Fickle man? Far away, hidden safely in the tent, Sunny was frowning. What exactly had the scouts found in the desert? What was the insurmountable advantage Valor wanted to secure at all costs? At this stage in the race toward the Black Pyramid, both clans were trying to establish a foothold in the desert. They were slowly ramping up the search for nightmare gates, which led to relatively safe areas, to use as entry points for the expedition forces. A few of these areas had already been found. What else could Knight Stad be hunting for? Some kind of precious resource or revelation about the region of the Dream Realm? A natural stronghold that could serve as a fortress for the forces of Valor? A citadel, even. There was that last part of the conversation as well. It was honestly rather disturbing. There seemed to be something complicated going on within Clan Valor, but Sunny had no idea what. Strangely enough, it was the emissaries of Song that helped him shed some light on the situation, because they were currently talking about Nephis as well. In a distant part of the camp, within the circle of armored vehicles, a lavish tent had been raised. Beastmaster and Shan were inside. At the moment, Beastmaster was enjoying a bowl of fresh fruit as she looked at her sister with a pleasant smile. Her words, however, were anything but pleasant. Beastmaster was saying, "Should we kill that girl, Changing Star?" Sunny did not have much of a reaction to that statement. Hearing a terrifying existence like Beastmaster contemplating the murder of one of his close ones was certainly a chilling experience. However, the person in question was Neff, so the feeling was not novel. Someone was always trying to kill her.
I'd like to see you try.
He lingered for a moment, then shook his head.
Actually, no. I take it back. I would not like it one bit.
Silence hung in the distant tent for a few moments. Shan did not hurry with an answer. When she eventually spoke, her voice was even. "That would require us to commit too many resources." Beastmaster seemed slightly surprised. The arch of her eyebrow was so exquisite that even Sunny's shadow was momentarily mesmerized. Luckily, he had sent the gloomy shadow to spy on her. That guy was not easily fazed. The shadow quickly regained its composure and continued to listen. "Too many resources? But she is just a master." Shan shook her head. "She is a master, yes, but not just any master." The saint pondered that statement for a bit as she enjoyed succulent grapes. "I guess you would know best. That thing she pulled off in the Forgotten Shore was indeed a thing of beauty. Plus, she is a self-healer. Killing those people is such a chore." She sighed, then said in a wistful tone, "Why did she have to go and join that dreadful clan? Granted, we did not try to recruit her too hard, but the King of Swords, that man. What is he thinking? First he sends the Han Li boy to kill her, then he welcomes her into his family. Truly is shameless." Sunny's eyes widened slightly.
So it was Anvil.
Finally, he knew who had stood behind Castor. Granted, there was nothing to do with that information. Shan seemed surprised too. Her exotic, beautiful face darkened a little. "I thought it was us who sent him. Has the clan forgotten their loyalty?" Beastmaster laughed. "No, you've been lost in the dream realm for too long, Shan. You forget that for most lesser clans, our three great families are a monolith. Most of the time, they can only guess which domain gives the order." She swallowed another grape and smiled. "Oh, we sent someone to kill her in the dream realm too. It's just that our messenger ended up being rather useless. He did not even make it to the Dark City." Sunny shifted slightly. So, there had been other assassins. Except for Castor, the Forgotten Shore had taken care of them, so that he didn't have to. The saint, meanwhile, scoffed. "But that girl is too lucky. When she was a child, the Dreamspawn held us back from going after her in full force. Now that the abomination is indisposed, she is an ascended, and such a troublesome one at that." This time, Sunny could not contain his agitation. What he just heard was a real bomb.
The Dreamspawn Asterion?
The most mysterious of the sovereigns, Asterion, had protected Nephis when she was a child. What? Why would he do that? Admittedly, Sunny had always felt that there was something strange about Neph's childhood story. The great clans had always been trying to kill her, sending one assassin after another. And yet, why had they failed? Why had they not sent a saint to solve the problem once and for all? He had assumed that there were two possibilities. Either the task of slaying the last daughter of the Immortal Flame clan had not been an important one, or the domains were constrained by having to act in secret. A saint moving to kill a mundane human, especially one from a prominent family, was not an easy thing to cover, considering that they were always in the spotlight. Or at least that was what he had thought before. Now, after learning more about the great clans and how they operated, Sunny came to understand that nothing was stopping them from slaughtering anyone they wanted with impunity, except for each other. If Asterion had been the one to constrain Valor and Song in their attempts to get rid of Nephis, that would explain a lot, but pose even more questions. For example, what was his motivation? Was it because she was a dream spawn like he was? Some sort of sentiment the enigmatic sovereign felt for the daughter of his former comrade? Something else entirely? Sunny simply did not know. And sadly, Beastmaster did not go into detail. Shan, meanwhile, looked at the relaxed saint with a frown. The corner of her mouth twitched downward. You grew too arrogant. Do not speak of that creature aloud. Strangely enough, Beastmaster acted as if she was at fault. Instead of rebuking Shan for admonishing her, the older and more powerful of the two, she nodded with a guilty look. Sorry, you are right. She remained silent for a bit, then shook her head. But something has to be done about Changing Star. The Awakened under her command was already a problem. I had hoped that Nightingale and Raised by Wolves would keep their distance, but they seem too friendly with her, and neither can be underestimated. And now there is that Master Sunless as well. What a brutal character, and in such a cute package. What a shame. Wasn't he supposed to be a simple scout? Shan smiled slightly. You keep underestimating the survivors of the Forgotten Shore. No one who survived there is simple. Sunless, there's more to him than meets the eye. He is a madman, though. Back in the Dark City, he had a falling out with Changing Star and spent months living in the ruins alone. Even I would not have survived that, but he did. Beastmaster thought for a few moments. Our guest had a few brushes with Ascended Sunless, yes? He did not speak about him much, so I assumed that there was little to be said. I should have known better, though. That person has strange standards. To him, another madman is not even worth mentioning. Sunny noted two things from that exchange. First, his ploy to appear as a savage brute was at least partially successful. Second, Mordred had not shared his secrets with the Great Clan Song, just as Sunny had expected.
No surprise here.
Beastmaster swallowed another grape, then suddenly asked, How is Bast doing, by the way? Are you taking good care of him? Shan stared at her sister for a while, not amused. He is doing fine. As for Nephis and her firekeepers, at this point our efforts would be better spent elsewhere. The saint laughed. Good. All right. Let's not kill Changing Star and her allies yet. She lingered for a moment, and then smiled. We do have to kill someone, though. Time is of the essence. There were more interesting things said that night. Sitting on a cot in a remote tent, Sunny had silently absorbed them all. There was a somber expression on his face.
Troublesome.
Each clan was planning to test the other during the retreat back to the siege capitals, which had not come as a surprise. From this point forward, the hostilities between Valor and Song were only going to escalate. If anything, this first confrontation was shaping out to be rather tame. Neither of the sides was fully committing their saints to the ambushes, preferring to bide their time and turn the conflict into a war of attrition. There were valuable assets that both clans kept under layers of protection. In terms of the ruthless economy of war, trying to take these assets off the board was not cost-effective at this point in time. Luckily, Nephis seemed to be one such asset as well. However, neither Valor nor Song could keep all their people protected. Cohorts of Awakened had to be sent out into the wilderness to scout for suitable nightmare gates. Scouts had to enter the Dream Realm and explore the deadly desert in search of positions that were suitable for establishing fortified expedition camps. Ascended, like Night Stad, had to lead the most important of these teams. These were the people the great clans were going to go after first, in East Antarctica and in the Dream Realm at later stages in the conflict, which Sunny did not mind one bit. The only thing he regretted was that he would not be able to get snacks and comfortably watch the soldiers of the great clans slaughter each other, as long as they limited their feud to outside the city walls. Sadly, and predictably, that was already not the case. Beastmaster was not satisfied with picking off Awakened cohorts in the wilderness. so she was planning to deliver a more damaging strike to her enemies. There were two possible targets: the headquarters of the Valor clan in the siege capital where Sunny was headed, or St. Tyrus and her Whitefeather clan in the city, where Central Army Command and Wake of Ruin were based. She chose the former. Morgan, meanwhile, was perfectly aware of the fact that an attack on her base of operations was imminent. Whether it was through some form of divination or simply through knowing her enemy and possessing a frighteningly sharp strategic mind, Sunny did not know. Regardless of the reason, she was not planning on preventing the assassins from infiltrating the siege capital. Instead, she was planning to lure them into a trap and slaughter them all. Imagining what sort of destruction the clash of two hidden forces would wreak on the heart of the besieged city, Sunny couldn't help but feel cold fury. Neither of the great clans cared about collateral damage. All they cared about was destroying the enemy. In fact, they seemed to care about it a little bit too much. Sunny had gotten a strange feeling from observing the four leaders of the secret war: Matic, Morgan, Shan, and Beastmaster. There were small details in what they said and how they said it that did not make a lot of sense. It was as though they were under even more pressure than there was supposed to be. That pressure made them want to hurry. This was why Morgan was also considering a clandestine attack of her own. Hers, however, was going to be much more daring and surgical, because unlike her adversary, she was sending an actual saint instead of a team of awakened led by a few masters. Sir Matic, the Whispering Blade, was going to personally deliver her lethal will to the enemy. His target was not the Antarctic headquarters of Clan Song, nor was it a large-scale destruction of their assets. Instead, he had to capture a single man: Mordred. The bleak man who called himself Ascended Bast was still in a siege capital controlled by Song. By now, he started silently spreading the mirrors he had created throughout the city. No one on the Valor side knew what the purpose of his strange actions was, but they were determined to prevent whatever he was doing from coming to fruition. Matic was going to infiltrate the siege capital and either destroy or contain the Prince of Nothing with the help of special weapons crafted by the King of Swords. It was a tremendous commitment for Morgan, considering how important Whispering Blade was. Sending him after Mordred meant that he would not be able to provide support for the forces of Valor anywhere else for some time. But on this, Sunny had to agree with the Daughter of Anvil that getting rid of the Prince of Nothing was a more dire need than suppressing or even killing one of Song's saints. The bastard was just too ineffable. So that was what the near future held for Sunny. He would follow the forces of Valor back to their siege capital, fighting a probing ambush staged by Song in the process. Once there, Matic would send off reinforcements for Nightstad and depart, leaving Morgan to deal with the team of assassins Beastmaster was dispatching to attack their headquarters. Sunny was not too concerned about what Whispering Blade would do to Mordred. The man was too powerful and too precise, and the decision to activate him so early in the conflict was too unexpected. No matter if he achieved his goal or not, the attack itself would be unseen and contained. The fight between the team of Beastmaster's assassins and Morgan's warriors now promised to do a lot of harm to the refugees trapped in the siege capital, which was why he had made a difficult decision to leave the Gloomy Shadow with the forces of Song. There was a lot of risk tied to that decision, but also a lot of potential benefit. Once enough kilometers separated Sunny from his shadow, he would lose contact with it. After that, the gloomy guy would be on his own for a while. The task in front of the shadow was both simple and difficult: to keep itself hidden, learn the identities of the assassins, and follow them back to Valor's territory. If everything went right, Sunny would know the precise location of the infiltration team as soon as they reached the siege capital. If not, his soul might get seriously wounded, or even worse, crippled. All he could do was trust in his shadow's competence. Sunny stood up from his cot and stretched, hearing the sounds of the battle slowly grow less intense. Now that the dawn had come, The Joint Army was preparing to withdraw and dissolve into 3 separate forces. His expression was slightly tense.
He'll be all right. The gloomy guy has been through a lot by my side, so he knows what he's doing.
He had to. With that, Sonny left the tent and went to find Nephis. Changing Star was in a watchtower near the outer edges of the camp, observing the ongoing battle. Her gaze was locked on the lustrous figure of Summer Night, who stood like a fortress amidst the attacking nightmare creatures, cutting them down with his flowing lance. Sonny approached and stared at the slaughter as well, wondering how it was that the saint had not gotten a single drop of blood on his armor. Was that a skill one could learn? The black silk of the Graceless Dusk always remained pristine, rejecting any kind of taint, but the same could not be said about his skin and hair, especially hair. Washing blood out of his hair was a real chore. This was one of the reasons Sonny had enjoyed the few months of being a scout and never getting his own hands dirty, instead relying on shadows to do the killing for him.
That guy, Summer Night, is both deadly on the battlefield and nice in person. Makes me wonder if he really is a saint. Every other transcendent I know is either the stern stoic type, vaguely sinister, or completely insane. He really doesn't fit.
Neff glanced in his direction and smiled with the corner of her mouth. Maybe you just attract these kinds of people. Sonny coughed. Come to think of it, stern and stoic, vaguely sinister, and completely insane were all words that could be used to describe Nephis as well. She looked back to the battlefield and added, "But you are right. Sir Galed is somewhat of an outlier among saints. He is too straightforward. What you see is what you get. Honor, valiance, loyalty, and all that. He is the picture of a noble knight." Sonny remained silent for a moment.
Is that a bad thing?
He certainly thought that it was. A person who proclaimed these virtues was either a hypocrite or dangerously naive. Gods only knew which option was worse. However, Sonny wanted to hear Neff's answer. She shrugged. Not usually, but in the case of Summer Night, it presents a contradiction. What is a person like that doing serving the King of Swords? And not just as a vassal, but as a direct retainer of Clan Valor, a tool in their machinations. She lingered for a few moments, then sighed. Maybe it has something to do with his flaw. Sonny looked at Nephis with curiosity.
What are you doing serving the King of Swords?
Her subtle smile grew a little wider, and white sparks ignited in her eyes. Ah, but I am not honorable, valiant, or loyal. I am just driven and good with a sword. Don't you know?
He scoffed. I do. Don't I know it well?
With that, Sonny leaned on the framework of the alloy watchtower and watched the vigilant saint fight in silence. At the same time, he sent Neff a mental message.
What did Morgan want to talk to you about?
She leaned on the alloy bar by his side. We are most likely going to be ambushed by Song on the way back to the siege capital. She warned me to be ready. There is also the issue of nightmare gates within the city. There are 16 of them at the moment, and keeping each one contained is a drain on the resources. Once we are back, the awakened soldiers under Morgan's command will begin challenging the seeds to close them. And scout the desert in the process, of course. She offered a few spots to the Firekeepers. Sonny hesitated for a few moments.
The Firekeepers? Are they going to attempt ascension?
Neff lowered her head a little, nodding. They have long saturated their cores and have more than enough experience. So yes, Shim's cohort will enter first, followed by 2 others. A month later, 2 more cohorts will challenge the second nightmare. The last 2 will go after the first challenger's return. Sonny blinked. If that plan worked, then, in less than a year, Changing Star would potentially command close to 50 masters. Some might die in the nightmare, But still, that was a staggering force, an inconceivable force even, by the standards of the modern world. But then again, the world was changing, and the return of the survivors of the Forgotten Shore had made so much noise for this exact reason, not because they were powerful awakened, but because each had a substantial chance of becoming a master, and maybe even a saint in the future. The force Cassia had built had the potential to dramatically shift the balance of power between the great clans. No wonder Nephis had seemed to be in a hurry to send the Firekeepers into the Seeds. The emissaries of Song knew what was at stake as well. Once the fighting between the forces of the great clans started in earnest, Beastmaster would without a doubt aim to destroy the Firekeepers before they ascended.
How complicated.
Sunny remained silent for a while, choosing his words carefully. Eventually, he spoke thought in a casual tone.
I happened to eavesdrop on a conversation.
Nephis glanced at him. Oh, by pure accident, I'm sure. He smiled. Then, however, the smile disappeared from his face. Sunny looked forward, pretending to study the battle.
Turns out it was your Uncle Vale who sent Castor to kill you, you know. Anvil of Valor, the King of Swords, that Uncle Vale.
She didn't show any hint of a strong reaction. I figured as much. Sunny sighed.
I also overheard that another one of your father's 3 friends had limited the great clans in what means they could use to kill you, back when you were a child. He seems to have protected you to a degree.
This time, Nephis couldn't maintain the mask of indifference. Someone else might not have noticed, but Sunny knew her too well. She was shaken. After a long pause, Neph whispered, So, that's how it is. I see. That explains a few things I always wondered about. Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then asked,
Do you have any idea what his reasons might be?
Nephis remained silent for a long time, looking at the battlefield. One half of her face was illuminated by a gentle light, the other drowned in shadows. The cold wind was playing with her silver hair, making it dance. Eventually, she let out a deep sigh. I don't. However, I do have a suspicion. I am the last daughter of the Immortal Flame Clan, Sunny, which means that I am also the last carrier of Sun God's lineage. Asterion had prevented that lineage from being snuffed out and had taken Mordret from Anvil. It is almost as if he is collecting the carriers of divine lineages. Nephis paused for a few moments and then added in a grave voice, If my suspicion is correct, then should you meet him in the future, you would be wise to be careful too, Sunny. You do not possess Shadow God's lineage, but Asterion might not know that. Shadow God, War God, Beast God, Storm God, and Heart God. All these lineages had already been found. Shadow God was the last one to remain hidden. Maybe that is why he stayed passive all these years, waiting patiently for it to reveal itself. She suddenly turned and looked him in the eyes, then said in her voice, discarding the safety of the Blessing of Dusk, Sunny, you have guarded your secrets well. You must continue to do so. Be careful if you wish, please. The cold wind got to Sunny as well, making him shiver. Soon enough, it was time to say goodbye again. Effie and Kai were returning to the government-controlled section of East Antarctica with Wake of Ruin and St. Tyrus, while Jet was leaving with the forces of Song. The joint army had already withdrawn from the battlefield and traveled some distance away from it. Now it was ready to break apart. Before it did, however, Sunny managed to find an opportunity to talk with Soul Reaper in private. The long columns of vehicles had come to a stop, and they found each other among the busy chaos of imminent separation.
How is living with Song Clan treating you?
Jet smiled a little, then shrugged. It's treating me fine. I'm often reminded of why it was exactly that I never wanted to be a part of a legacy clan. But it's fine. Weirdly, I feel a bit of kinship with these women.
Sunny raised an eyebrow. Kinship? Really? Why?
She lingered for a few moments. A thief knows a thief, as a wolf knows a wolf. It's just a vague feeling, but I think that their flaws are similar to mine. Not exactly the same, but similar. I have no solid proof, of course, but there are ways to tell. A thing like that influences you in many subtle ways.
Jet looked away and let out a wistful sigh.
All of Kisong's daughters are adopted, you know. Many of them were taken from the outskirts when they were very young. Who knows? In another life, I might have been a princess of a great clan as well. Wouldn't that be a sight?
Sunny looked at her gloomily, trying to imagine Soul Reaper in the traditional wine-red attire of the Song clan. However, his imagination failed him. No matter how hard Sunny tried, he just couldn't imagine Jet wearing a dress. He scoffed. I do know, and yes, that would be a sight. However, I like the current you much more.
Soul Reaper laughed. Me too, Sunny. Me too. You are maybe a bit too young to understand the sentiment, but I fought long and hard to become the current me. I wouldn't trade it for the world.
The smile slowly disappeared from her face, and she looked at him with a somber expression.
You know that things are about to change in East Antarctica, right?
Sunny slowly nodded, prompting her to ask,
So, what are you going to do?
He remained silent for a few moments, then shrugged. Probably something stupid, but not too stupid. It's hard to tell yet. Soul Reaper studied his face for a while, then nodded.
Let's stay in touch then.
With that, she turned around and walked away, heading for the departing force of Songs Awakened. Sunny watched Soul Reaper go, considering if he should have told her more. He had already warned her to stay clear of Mordret. As for informing Jet of the presence of his shadow, which would do neither of them any good, it was not like she could help the gloomy guy in his mission. There are too many unknown variables at play. I have no idea how the situation will unfold for both of us. One thing is certain, though. We'll cross paths again soon, before it's all over. He grimaced, then went to join his own convoy. The ostentatious Tortoise Echo had been dismissed, and they were going to be traveling by using more mundane means of transportation, but not much more mundane. Many of Valor Awakened were in possession of Echo mounts, and would be riding them across the desolate landscape. There were ordinary vehicles as well. Sunny himself was going to catch a ride with the Firekeepers, but before that, he snuck into a small crevice that was drowned by deep shadows. There, he found a small figure laying motionlessly on the ground, spread-eagled, with a drunk expression on its tiny, ugly face. The imp seemed to have grown bigger. His belly had, at least, protruding from the scrawny frame of the little fiend like a balloon, looking as if it was on the verge of bursting. Noticing Sunny, the shadow turned its head and grinned stupidly. Sunny closed his eyes for a moment, then shook his head. Gods, you gluttonous little wretch. Can you even stand? The imp stared at him lazily, and then answered in a grating, screeching voice. Wretch! Sunny scowled. Who are you calling a wretch, you wretch? The imp did not deign to answer, so he sighed and dismissed the shadow, sending the scrawny fiend to digest his ill-gotten gains within the darkness of a shadow core. I'll check on his progress later. That bastard better have listened to me and only eaten those nightmare creatures that had something to do with steel and metal. Otherwise, he'll be on a vegetarian diet for a very, very long time. Sunny left the crevice and walked over to one of the armored vehicles. There were already a few familiar faces inside, the members of Cassia's former cohort. The healer, Shim, Kor, Shakti, and others.
Noticing Sonny, they all became lively.
Sonny, man, you were a real terror on the battlefield yesterday.
When the hell did you become that scary?
Now I want to ascend too. Maybe I'll get a pseudo-transformation ability like you.
You're an artisan core. What kind of transformation are you going to get? Turn into a block of wood?
Better be a block of wood than a blockhead like you.
Sonny greeted them with a few smiles and a few elusive answers, then walked over to where Cassia was sitting and looked around.
Hey, Cass, where's Nephis?
The blind girl pointed forward, where another vehicle, this one larger and better armored, was visible through the windshield of the APC.
Morgan invited her for a last-minute discussion.
He smiled darkly.
Oh, yeah? Discussion of what?
Cassia lingered with the answer.
Probably the ambush.
He did not know what to say.
What kind of stupid ambush is this when everyone knows that it's happening? Damn. I'm sure that even the ambushers know that we know. The sheer stupidity of it all.
Sonny sighed, then sat near Cassia and grew quiet. Soon the column of vehicles started to move, surrounded by a moving shield of mounted awakened. The human forces were returning victorious from a dire battle with a harrowing horde of nightmare creatures, having slain 4 powerful titans. But what awaited them was not the warm welcome of the citizens, but the swords and bullets of fellow humans. He shook his head dejectedly.
No, actually there might be nightmare creatures in the ambush as well. That's Beastmaster we're talking about after all.
The journey back to the Valor Enclave in East Antarctica was going to take several days. On the first day, the awakened riders charged forward many times, slaughtering any band of nightmare creatures that was unfortunate enough to wander into the convoy's path. Awakened and fallen abominations were ruthlessly cut down long before they could pose a threat to the vehicles. When a corrupted one appeared, the Knights of Valor attacked personally. Watching these exalted masters fight was both an inspiration and a grim reminder of what Sonny contended against. Each of them was no less deadly than Pierce and Welty. Mordred's jailers had been, maybe even more so. With the knights slaying the more dangerous nightmare creatures, none of the saints had to personally intervene yet. There were also Morgan's echoes. Strangely enough, there were only a few of them in view. The Princess of War must have dismissed some of them for now. Of course, there was also another possibility. Morgan could have sent several echoes to stage an ambush of her own. In fact, Sonny was more or less certain that she had. He had spent the last month carefully studying the expedition force of the Great Clan. By now, he knew the faces of pretty much every awakened, ascended, and mundane specialist that Valor had sent to the Southern Quadrant, as well as the rough outline of their abilities. This was why it had not escaped Sonny's attention that several cohorts of awakened that had participated in the battle against the Titanic Horde were mysteriously missing from the convoy. They were, most likely, en route to lay a trap for the returning force of Song Warriors. He did not envy them one bit. Sonny himself spent the first day silently observing how the Warriors of Valor fought through the shadows. He thought about striking up a conversation with Cassia, but found it hard to find a topic to discuss. At least one that did not have to do with nightmare creatures, machinations of the great clans, or the tumultuous future facing them all. It was a bit strange. He had thought that they were close. Despite everything, there were very few people in his world, if any, who were closer to him than her. And yet, Sonny realized that he did not know much about Cassia outside the dire reality of being awakened. He never met her family, which she mentioned so much on the Forgotten Shore. He had never visited her home or learned of her hobbies, things she enjoyed, things she found frustrating. He didn't even know what her official position in Clan Valor was, and how her life had changed because of it. That realization was disheartening. Granted, Cassia herself was part of the reason for the distance between them. After awaking, She seemed to have closed herself off from the outside world somewhat. After the ascension, her isolation had only grown more pronounced. It was as though the blind girl was making a conscious effort to blend into the background, becoming as obscure and forgettable as possible. Sonny glanced at her with a complicated expression. A sudden thought crossed his mind.
I don't think I ever wished her a happy birthday.
That had been how they met all those years ago. Well, actually, it was only around 4 years ago, on the day of the winter solstice in the academy cafeteria. Cassia had suddenly wished him a happy birthday. She was more or less the only sleeper who had spoken to him there. Sonny knew that Cassia was the youngest of the cohort, and that her birthday was somewhere in late June or early July, close to Rains. This year, he had been busy fighting his way to Falcon Scott during that time, so there was a solid excuse. However, there were the years before that. Sonny remained silent for a while, thinking. Then he shifted slightly and asked,
By the way, Cassia, how's your family doing?
She did not react for a moment, then turned her head slightly and frowned in confusion.
What?
Sonny leaned back.
I asked how your family is doing.
The blind girl hesitated. Then a subtle smile illuminated her delicate face.
Oh, they are doing well. I applied to have their citizenship rank raised, so my mom can't stop bragging to the neighbors. Dad had to talk to her right after taking driving lessons and purchasing a PTV license. He parks the PTV where everyone can see it too, so I think I'll be the one who has to talk with him now.
Sonny chuckled.
I understand. You might not know it, but I took driving lessons as well. From an actual ace pilot, by the way. My ride sort of blew up. But when we get back to NQSC, I'll buy a new one. And when I do, you can count on it being parked in the most visible places often.
Cassia remained silent for a few moments, then asked with strange curiosity,
What else do you want to do when you get back?
He scratched the back of his head.
I have not given it much thought. Well, first things first, my shop is in desperate need of new exclusive merchandise. I've been practicing a lot here in Antarctica, so I might be able to bring the Brilliant Emporium to an entirely new level. Maybe I'll even branch out and open a memory boutique in Bastion. Oh, also I've been thinking about opening a restaurant, feeding people and making money at the same time. Isn't that a dream?
Sonny thought for a bit, then added,
I'm going to need to be in Bastion a lot if I want to do proper business. I don't want to be anchored there, though. So maybe I'll find a scenic, quiet citadel somewhere nearby, out of the way of the mess between Valor and Song.
He smiled, then asked,
How about you?
Cassia simply sighed.
I think I'll be very busy after returning to NQSC. If I do have some free time, all I want to do is wear pajamas around the house and do nothing.
She lingered for a moment, then suddenly flashed him a smile.
I do promise I'll visit your restaurant, though. I'll even leave a big tip.
As they talked, the sun wobbled to the edge of the sky, never falling behind the horizon, but turning the world dim. The convoy came to a stop, preparing for the next leg of the journey. In that lull, an awakened from Clan Valor arrived, putting an end to their conversation. It was very easy to send a message through the short-range communication network of the convoy, but Morgan had deemed it necessary to send an actual person to fetch them. The awakened approached the APC, where Sonny and Cassia were, his imposing armored figure appearing given the external cameras of the armored vehicle, and politely knocked on the main hatch. When one of the firekeepers opened it, the man cleared his throat and said with solemn gravitas,
Lady Song of the Fallen, Ascended Sunless, Lady Morgan is inviting you to join her in the head vehicle at your convenience.
Sonny recognized the awakened from spying on Morgan and Maddock yesterday. The guy sure was a bit too pompous for a glorified messenger, but remembering his earnest reaction to Whispering Blade's praise, that was not at all unexpected. All Valor Awakened were like that. Too serious and full of ardent devotion. The Firekeepers were zealously devoted to their leader too, but at least they did not stand on ceremony. They saw Nephis as the best of them, as opposed to better than them. There was an important distinction. Sunny shook his head, then nodded at the awkward Awakened and rose from the crate he was sitting on. Cassia stood up too and followed him outside. Her steps were cautious, but she seemed to have no problem navigating the world without being able to see it. It was a far cry from how helpless she had been on the Forgotten Shore. Her hand was resting on the hilt of the Quiet Dancer too, reminding Sunny of how deadly of a fighter she had become. Of course, with most of her abilities having nothing to do with combat, Cassia's battle prowess could not compare to that of more straightforward masters. Still, he wouldn't want to fight someone who knew his every move in advance. Sunny understood very well how dreadful such an opponent would be, because he'd hunted down many foes by relying on Shadow Dance. The Awakened Squire kept a respectful silence as he led them to the head of the column, where an armored vehicle that would put even the Rhino to shame stood before a wide crossroad. It was surrounded by a watchful ring of awakened warriors. They gave Sunny and Cassia stern looks, then stepped aside to let them through. It was nonsensical. Currently, two of the most deadly masters in the world and Whispering Blade himself were inside the vehicle. What could these Awakened do to protect them? Once inside, Sunny saw Morgan, Matic, and Nephis gathered around a holographic table that showed a topographical projection of the surrounding area. Some distance away, a few spots were marked with red. It did not take a genius strategist to know that those were the most convenient places for an ambush. At least Sunny would have chosen them if he had to lay a trap for the forces of Valor. Then again, Sunny did not need a convenient spot and advantageous terrain to ambush someone. All he needed was a bit of shadow. Morgan welcomed them with a nod and gestured them to come closer. Once they did, she addressed Cassia in a neutral tone. "Cassia, do you have anything to share with us?" The blind girl nodded, then lingered for a few moments. Eventually, she raised her hand and pointed to a particular red mark. "There." Morgan smiled, while Matic raised his brow slightly.
How do you know, young lady?
Sunny had the same question, although he also had an idea of what the answer would be. He slightly shook his head, feeling a strange mix of awe, admiration, and dejection. Cassia, meanwhile, lowered her hand and explained, "I used the time the forces of both clans recently spent together to mark several of Song's people with my Ascended ability. Many of them possess powerful memories to disrupt attempts at divination, but there are very few that can disrupt my powers. Certainly not enough to protect every Awakened in their camp." She turned to the map and added calmly, "Currently, one of the marked is in that ravine, surrounded by 3 cohorts of Awakened. These Awakened are only a part of the ambush, however. The main striking force is underwater in a nearby lake, several hundred nightmare creatures, all tamed by Beastmaster and controlled by an Ascended proxy. I don't have eyes on them, but the person I marked discussed the details of the attack with the Ascended before separating. I listened."
Matic chuckled. Lady Cassia, I wouldn't want to be your enemy. Wonderfully done.
Cassia simply offered him a curt nod. Morgan glanced at them and smiled. "Isn't she wonderful indeed?" With that, she patted the blind girl on the shoulder. "Better yet, Cassia is the only person on the continent who can never be taken by that abominable kin of ours, which only makes me appreciate her more. We should employ more blind people, don't you think, Uncle?" That last statement was said in a nonchalant and slightly amused tone, and rubbed Sunny the wrong way. If Cassia felt the same, though, she did not let it show. Just like that, the probing ambush of Clan Song was laid bare. The convoy had no choice but to take the route through the area where the trap was prepared for them. But knowing what to expect, they could descend upon the ambushers and cut them down in one fell swoop. No wonder Morgan was pleased. At that moment, Nephis spoke, glancing at the Princess of War coldly. "Let's not draw this out. We should dismantle the ambush as soon as possible and stay on guard. Cassia is powerful, but she is not all-powerful. There might be other aspects of the trap that we failed to account for." Morgan smiled. "A good suggestion. Since you were the one to voice it, dear sister, why don't you take your firekeepers and deal with this issue personally? They'll be leaving for the nightmares soon, so this might be their last opportunity to wet their blades with the blood of song for a long while." Nephis turned away and looked at the map with a bleak expression. "I will." Sonny, who had remained silent all that time, cleared his throat.
Sorry, but should I be listening to this conversation? Why am I here exactly?
Morgan looked at him with confusion, then chuckled.
"Why, you are a representative of the government, Master Sunless. You are the perfect person to share the vile machinations of the Song Clan with. Who knows? Maybe I'll want to complain to the authorities later. You'll be an important witness."
Then she smiled at him.
"Plus, I thought that you might enjoy a small distraction like this. Would you please accompany my little sister on this mission, Master Sunless? As a neutral observer, of course. It would make me feel better about her safety."
Sonny stared at her with a dubious expression.
Yeah, right,
he thought to himself. The battle maniac probably just wanted to see him kill something again, or maybe deepen his connection to the Valor clan through bloodshed. He shrugged.
Sure, why not? I am part of this convoy as well, after all. If we were to be ambushed, my safety would be compromised too.
The Princess of War nodded, then crossed her arms and looked at the map.
"True. I'll be awaiting good news then."
The contingent of Valor soldiers camped for a few hours of rest, while several vehicles containing the Firekeepers secretly continued forward. They advanced at a moderate speed for a few hours, then hid the vehicles between the rusty ruins of massive machines left behind by the Dark Times, and continued toward the place of the ambush on foot. Sonny walked with them, scouting the path ahead with his shadows. As he did, he heard the Firekeepers talk. One of them, a tall young man who possessed the ability to summon 2 more arms and fought by wielding 2 greatswords, was speaking in a contemplative tone.
"It's been a while since I killed a human. Honestly, I sort of assumed that I would never have to do it again after leaving the Forgotten Shore. Should have known better."
He sighed, then glanced at the leader of his cohort.
"What about you, Shim?"
Shim, the healer who usually fought where the battle was direst, wielding a shield and spear, shrugged. "I don't think I have ever killed a human." The others looked at him with surprise.
What are you talking about, you maniac? I saw you got at least half a dozen guards in the throne room of the Bright Castle, and that was just one day of that mess.
The healer glanced at them evenly. Those weren't humans. They didn't qualify. Even Sonny was given pause by that cold logic. Shim was right about something, though. Some humans were worse than nightmare creatures. In any case, the Firekeepers did not seem too opposed to the idea of fighting against one of the great clans. Perhaps the fact that Clan Song was currently laying a trap to attack their convoy played a part in their nonchalance, but they would have probably followed Nephis even if the situation was reversed. As for Changing Star herself, she had grown quiet in anticipation of the battle, mentally preparing herself for the strain of using her aspect. Sonny did not want to bother her. Eventually, they neared the spot marked on the map and switched to moving stealthily, slowly getting closer and closer to the ravine where 3 cohorts of Song Awakened were laying in ambush. Cassia confirmed that they were still there and helped the Firekeepers avoid being seen by the hidden watchmen. The lake, where the hundreds of tamed nightmare creatures hid, was also nearby, separated from the ravine by a few 100 meters of dirt and a weathered cement road. When they came into view of the ravine, bending low to the ground to remain unnoticed, Nephis stopped and looked at her soldiers. One of them whispered calmly,
What's the plan, Lady Changing Star?
She hesitated for a few moments, then simply said, "Slaughter them all." Neff sighed, then summoned a memory that resembled a torch made of polished black wood, with a cage at the top of it, forged out of silvery metal. Turning around to shield it from view with her body, she activated the enchantment of the torch, causing a cold blue flame to ignite in the cage. She raised one hand, drawing the stream of blue fire into it. "Cassia, I'll leave the Ascended to you." The blind girl nodded, then unsheathed the quiet dancer. The slender rapier slipped out of her hand, hovered in the air for a moment, and then flew toward the calm lake. It stayed close to the ground, almost unseen. The blue fire, meanwhile, was flowing into Neff's hand and swirling, slowly coalescing into a sphere. No matter how much fire she drew from the silver torch, it continued to burn with the same intensity. The rippling blue sphere began to collapse onto itself and compress as more and more flame was added to it. Its heat was growing unbearable. As the density of the sphere increased, wisps of white flame rose from her skin and mixed into it. Slowly, the color of the blue flames began to lighten, growing from deep blue to light blue, and eventually to pure white. By that time, the sphere was trembling violently, as if struggling to contain the furious power contained within it, and Neff's face grew pale. Then, she suddenly made a fist, compressing the sphere even further. At that moment, it was hard not to notice the pale radiance emanating from her figure. There was some movement in the ravine, but it was too late. Standing to her full height, Changing Star took a step forward and whipped her forearm forward, as if throwing a disc. The small sphere of white flame pierced the air, leaving a trail of scorched earth in its wake. It disappeared into the ravine a second later, and then the ground shook. There was a blinding flash and a deafening boom. A fountain of fire suddenly shot from the ravine into the cold sky, washing the world in white. Just like that, 3 cohorts of awakened elites were wiped out. Nephis looked a little tired. A few moments later, Cassia turned her head and spoke.
"The Ascended is dead."
Neff nodded, then turned to the firekeepers. "Get ready." The waters of the calm lake suddenly boiled, and a flood of abominations started to emerge from them, all surging toward the small hill they stood upon. The young man whom Sunny had overheard speaking to Shim earlier scratched the back of his head with one of his 4 hands.
"Well, I guess I won't have to kill any humans today either."
With that, he shrugged and summoned his great swords. The firekeepers calmly faced the tide of nightmare creatures. Not too long after that, every last one of the abominations was wiped out. Not a drop of human blood had been spilled, at least on the Valor side. Sunny observed it all with a detached expression. From start to finish, he had not moved a finger. It was honestly kind of anticlimactic.
Wasn't I complaining about having to wash blood off myself a couple of days earlier, though?
It was nice to work with professionals. The firekeepers retraced their steps, returning to where they had left the vehicles. The mood among the veterans of the Forgotten Shore was neutral. It was as if they had fought a mundane battle, not one that would become the opening act of a bloody confrontation between 2 great clans. Sunny, however, felt slightly dejected. He did not pity the awakened of the great clan's song. They would not have any pity on him if the situation was reversed either. And yet, all of it was such a shameful waste. Valor and song were wasting the lives of skilled warriors, and in the middle of a chain of nightmares no less. That was both odious and the reason why those who followed their orders did not deserve his pity or mercy. The armored vehicles moved across the desolate landscape of Antarctica, returning victorious to the camp. They navigated the treacherous expanse of countless rivers and lakes and rejoined the main force of the Valor clan close to dawn, which was not much different from night and day in Antarctica. Their return did not cause much fanfare. mostly because few people knew of the impending ambush. Those who did or were smart enough to figure things out on their own, however, paid the small column of vehicles close attention. Their faces changed slightly when they saw that none of the firekeepers seemed to be missing or even bear any wounds. The skilled awakened of the great clan were begrudgingly impressed, if not envious. Sonny left the APC with the rest of the Forgotten Shore awakened to stretch his legs. Nephis and Cassia left to make a report to Morgan, but he stayed behind. There was no point in being there personally anyway. One of his shadows was going instead. Hidden within Neph's, the conversation went more or less exactly as he had expected. Morgan seemed both pleased and disappointed by the easy victory the firekeepers had achieved. She had expected more from the forces of the famed clan song. Maddock offered Nephis mild praise with a polite smile. Both were impatient to get to the real bloodshed. Changing Star herself remained impassive. She did not even seem moved by the boon she must have received for wiping out 3 cohorts of Elite Awakened, if their cores were fully saturated. The bounty of souls she had collected had to be close to 1,000 fragments. Sonny did not summon the runes to check, since he saw no reason to. Not long after their return, the command to break camp was given, and the soldiers prepared to continue the march. Soon, the convoy started to roll forward, only to come to a sudden halt not a minute later. The APC Sonny was riding on stopped so abruptly that he almost flew out of his seat.
What the hell?
There was some kind of disturbance outside, with soldiers exiting the vehicles and looking around in confusion. The shouts of commanders echoed in the air, and the awakened riders spread out, turning their mounts around. Soon, the source of the disturbance became clear. One of the APCs had failed to start and rejoin the convoy. It just stood there, unmoving, isolated from the rest by a stretch of space. All attempts to contact the cohort of the awakened assigned to the APC failed. Suddenly, Sonny felt a chill creep up his spine. He looked at the head vehicle through one of his shadows. Right at that moment, its hatch opened, and Morgan emerged, her vermilion eyes radiating such a sharp sense of coldness that he felt as if his soul would be cut. The Princess of War jumped down and walked toward the tail of the convoy, her red cloak trailing behind her like a river of blood. Maddock and Nephis followed. Sonny hesitated for a moment, then used Shadow Step to quietly appear next to them.
This should be interesting.
The 4 of them approached the silent APC, which was already surrounded by a ring of awakened soldiers. One of them took a step forward, addressing Morgan with concern.
My lady, please, it might be dangerous.
She walked past the awakened without a word and raised a hand. Morgan's fingers sliced through the armored alloy of the vehicle's hatch as if it were paper, and a moment later, the dark entrance to the interior of the APC was revealed. She dove into the darkness without a moment of hesitation. Maddock followed a second behind. Sonny and Nephis glanced at each other and then joined them. Sonny did not know what he had expected to see inside the silent vehicle. A scene of revolting butchery or a hidden abomination, perhaps? But what he had not expected was nothing. The interior of the APC was empty. There were no bodies, no blood, no signs of the struggle, and no awakened either. It was as if they had disappeared into thin air. Morgan looked around with a grim face, then walked over to the pilot's cabin and reached behind the backrest of the seat, grasping something. Turns out Sonny was mistaken. There was something left inside the APC, and she was currently holding it in her hand. A single, unassuming arrow with dull-colored fletching and an arrowhead cast out of mundane alloy. Morgan gritted her teeth, her eyes burning with fury. Her voice sounded like the hiss of a sword leaving its scabbard.
Silent stalker.
Sonny looked around the empty vehicle with a complicated expression.
A saint was here?
The mystery of what had happened to the cohort of Valor's Awakened was not a mystery anymore. The Firekeepers had dismantled the ambush prepared for the convoy by the forces of Song. But while they were doing it, someone else had entered the heavily guarded camp unseen, slaughtered a cohort of elite awakened without making a single sound, and left, taking their bodies away. That someone was Silent Stalker, a transcendent huntress and one of Key Song's daughters. She even left one of her arrows behind to let the enemy know who the perpetrator was. A saint could have wreaked much more havoc if they wanted to, but Silent Stalker had seemingly only wanted to do one thing: prove a point. Morgan snarled, then snapped the arrow with her thumb and threw the pieces away. Maddox grimaced, then said evenly,
Beastmaster is sending a message. It seems that she wants to provoke us.
His niece remained silent for a few moments, composing herself. Then she suddenly smiled. Her previous disappointment appeared to be gone. Message received. Nothing else happened on their way back to the siege capital. It had grown harder to eavesdrop on Morgan and Maddox once again, so Sonny didn't learn much about the consequences of Beastmaster's mocking message. He did, however, understand from small hints and clues that Valor's ambush had gone slightly better than the one prepared by Song. Most of the ambushers even survived, and were now following a different route to return to safe territory. The great clans had exchanged slaps. What would come next were actual blows. It was nice to return to civilization. Sonny slept in a soft bed and had a hot shower, and prepared himself an actual meal, despite the dire war raging somewhere on the continent, 2 wars even. His routine was strangely mundane and peaceful. He even received a video message from Rain. The network in East Antarctica was not nearly as in shambles as it had been in the Antarctic Center, so the bandwidth allocated to him allowed for such frivolities from time to time. To Sonny's slight disappointment, Rain only spoke about what was happening in her life for a short while, using the rest of the recording to demonstrate the progress she was making in her training and ask for pointers. The message ended with a few carefree sentences.
Oh, by the way, do you remember the classmate I told you about? The one whose sister is an MWP pilot in Antarctica? Her unit got into a really bad situation, and she only survived because a master named Devil saved her. Thank the gods, I can't even imagine how her family would have felt if not for him. Anyway, if you know that guy, buy him a drink. Better yet, try to stay close to him. He is some sort of a big hero, so you'll be safer with him. What I'm trying to say is that you should be careful. Take care of yourself. Bye.
The message ended, leaving Sonny in amused silence. He shook his head.
What are the chances? And what the hell does she mean, do I know that guy? Have I not told her that people call me the Devil of Antarctica? I'm sure I bragged about it.
Then he went about composing a response, first going over her technique and swordsmanship, then adding a few phrases at the end.
Yes, I do remember. As for the Devil, as it happens, I know him pretty well. That guy is indeed amazing. He is also very powerful, handsome, and disgustingly rich. Your classmate's sister was very fortunate to meet him. He mostly keeps company with saints and beautiful legacies from the great clans these days. But since you asked, I'll go buy him a drink right after finishing writing this message.
Sonny grinned as he finished and sent the message, then fulfilled his promise by walking to the nearest provision stall and ordering a cup of cheap synthetic coffee. He savored its warmth on the street, watching the refugees sheltered within the city walls go about their daily lives. The atmosphere in the siege capital was not all light. It was charged by distress and dread. But it was not at all as heavy as it had been in Falcon Scott. No matter how full of tribulations and anxiety their lives had become, people lived here, not just trying desperately to survive. Sonny felt that he was alive too. Rain was safe and did not show any symptoms of the spell. The evacuation was proceeding at a healthy pace. Nephis, Cassia, Effie, Kai, and Jet were all doing fine. As for the great clans, he now had a clear target in mind at least. The assassins of the Song clan were going to arrive soon. Preventing the clash between them and the forces of valor from spilling into the streets would be his first independent move. He had to prepare well. Sunny finished his coffee and then took a walk toward the headquarters of the Valor clan. His duties as a government envoy could not wait. There were issues he had to pass along, reports he had to make, and secrets he had to steal. Before he could do any of it, though, Cassia stopped by the small office Sunny had been given within the compound to fetch him on behalf of Morgan. The Princess of War wanted to see him first thing in the morning for some reason. As they walked through the corridors of the lavish compound, Sunny glanced at the blind girl and asked,
"What exactly does she want this time?"
Cassia hesitated for a few moments, then shrugged.
I'm not sure. She seemed excited about something. Well, as far as Morgan allows herself to show genuine emotions at least.
Sunny sighed. After a short span of silence, he asked another question.
"Hey, can you help me out with something shortly?"
The blind girl slowed down a little.
With what?
He considered his words for a few moments.
"I want to visit a few places on the Chained Isles. The flying ship Noctis left behind can now descend through the crushing, right? It will only take a couple of days if you pilot it."
Cassia smiled.
Oh, sure, I can help. The Ivory Tower has drifted east of the Tear, though, so the journey might take a bit more time.
Sunny had a few reasons to return to the Chained Isles, but the main one was on the Shipwreck Island, where he had fought the Wormvine, or rather, under it. The remains of Sun Prince still swayed there, tangled in the broken chains. Sunny wanted the imp to devour as much of the steel giant as possible. His initial desire to make the little fiend develop a nearly indestructible body was a lofty one, but in practice, finding enough magical metal to feed the ravenous shadow was proving to be a problem. So, it was very convenient to know the location of a giant, dead, ancient iron saint. As he was imagining how much the imp would improve after sinking his teeth into the Sun Prince, Cassia led him to a guarded door and opened it. Sunny was a little surprised, since it was not one of the usual places where he met the emissaries of valor. It was a spacious, heavily reinforced dojo, with all kinds of swords and implements of war resting in armored cases. Morgan was standing in the middle of the dojo, wearing nothing except for a light black tunic. Her vermilion eyes were gleaming with sharp, intense desire to cross swords with a worthy opponent and destroy them. Sunny froze.
I suddenly don't feel safe."
The Princess of Clan Valor smiled widely at the sight of him.
Master Sunless, if I remember correctly, you promised me a spar.
Sunny remembered his first clash with Morgan very well. Back then, he had been a mere awakened. Nevertheless, as far as awakened went, he had considered himself to be an outlier in terms of personal power and combat skill. He had even entertained the idea of winning their duel. Sunny had been blessed with the powers of a divine aspect, trained by Changing Star of the Immortal Flame Clan, tempered in the ruthless crucible of the Forgotten Shore, and possessed of an aspect legacy. So, there had been a reason for his confidence. The streak of easy wins he had achieved in the dreamscape also played a role. Even though some of the opponents he had faced were challenging foes, none managed to make him feel seriously threatened. Sunny had involuntarily grown a little arrogant. Morgan had destroyed that arrogance. She had been the first master he crossed swords with, and not just any master at that. The heiress of the great clan Valor was at the absolute pinnacle of what an ascendant could be. Being utterly crushed by her in less than 40 seconds had hit him like a bucket of cold water, instantly extinguishing whatever nascent hubris Sunny could have developed. Her obsessively flawless skill, her overwhelming physical prowess, her crystal clear killing intent, all of it made a lasting impression on him. Sunny had returned with 2 valuable gifts from that battle. The first was a breakthrough in his mastery of shadow dance. The second was a stark reminder of how many crouching tigers there were among the awakened. Yes, he was outstanding and powerful, but he was not the only outstanding powerful person out there. Ever since that battle, Sonny had been instinctively comparing every master he fought with Morgan. So far, no one had made the cut. Not in the waking world, not in the dream realm, and not in the second nightmare. Which was why he was very curious to see how he would compare to her now that they were both ascended. Sonny was not the same person who had met Morgan in the dreamscape. He had lived through too many tribulations since then. The Night Temple, the Red Colosseum, the Gauntlet of Nightmares, the Temple of the Chalice, the Ivory City, and the Antarctic Center. From the quiet dread of LO-49 to the cold despair of Falcon Scott. Each of these trials left scars on his soul, but also made him a much more experienced and deadly fighter.
That is true.
But Morgan must not have remained stagnant either. St. Tyrus had once said the Anvil's daughter was too young and inexperienced to challenge the third nightmare, which had to mean that she had been actively earning the necessary experience all that time. So this spar of theirs was bound to be interesting.
Sure, I was looking forward to it.
She nodded with satisfaction, then told Cassia to take a seat. Then Morgan walked to a case containing a multitude of training swords, all fashioned to withstand the intense pressure of being wielded by masters, and thus insanely expensive, and looked at them thoughtfully.
What weapon would you prefer to use? Swords? Spears? Something more exotic? No weapons at all, perhaps? Oh, I forgot to ask. Are you going to be fighting as is, or assume that pseudo-transformation of yours?
It did not seem like she particularly cared, as if it was of no concern whether she would face a human or a towering fiend. Sonny hesitated for a moment, then shook his head.
No transformation. It only serves as a force multiplier if the underlying skill is not there. Using it is pointless, not to mention a drain on the essence. I mostly activate it when there are too many enemies around to reap the benefit of having 4 arms. As for the weapon...
He pulled on a shadow cast by a support pillar and formed it into a blunt, featureless black tachi.
That would be enough.
Morgan smiled.
Neat trick.
With that, she took a simple, straight training sword from the case and walked to the center of the dojo. Stopping there, she pierced Sonny with a sharp look of her vibrant vermilion eyes.
I would have suggested using our aspect abilities freely, but that would probably destroy a large part of this level of the compound. So sadly, we have to limit ourselves to our dormant and awakened powers. I hope you don't mind.
Sonny shrugged. He did not mind. It would have been a shame if he had not learned what Morgan's ascended ability was already, but he had. In fact, he had not only observed her for more than a month and come up with a solid theory, but had also asked Cassia for confirmation. The blind girl was now able to see both the attributes and the aspect abilities of those near her after all. She was a priceless source of information and an almost limitless well of it. Thanks to her, Sonny now knew a lot about many people, including the likes of Whispering Blade and Beastmaster. With Cassia's help, Sonny had finally confirmed, without a shadow of a doubt, that those of the Valor bloodline, Anvil and all his children at least, carried the lineage of War God in their veins. As for Morgan's aspect abilities, her dormant ability allowed her to passively enhance the sharpness of anything she touched. Her awakened ability was a comprehensive physical augmentation with emphasis on resilience. Basically, her body could become as durable as tempered steel. Her ascended ability was a strange one, though. It allowed her to assimilate enchantments into her body and soul, inheriting their effects. As a master, the number of enchantments she could absorb was limited to 3, and they could be switched freely for different ones at any point in time. Considering how powerful, versatile, and unpredictable such an ability was, Sunny was more than willing to forego using ascended abilities today. Standing opposite each other, the two of them studied the opponent for a while in silence. Sunny remembered the 36 seconds he had managed to hold out against Morgan the last time they fought. Morgan was probably studying his posture and expression, as well as replaying the scenes from the battle against the Titanic horde in her mind. After all, she didn't know that this was not the first time the two of them had faced each other holding swords in their hands. Slowly, a smile of anticipation appeared on Morgan's beautiful face. Her vermilion eyes glinted, and her crimson lips parted, revealing pearly white teeth. "Prepare yourself, Master Sunless." Sunny almost rolled his eyes.
Is there a need for her to announce her attack?
He did not get to finish that thought, however. Suddenly, Morgan was beside him, and her sword was falling like the inescapable blade of a guillotine. Morgan moved much faster than he had in the dreamscape. One moment, she was standing calmly a dozen meters away from him. The next, she was already there, delivering a downward cut aimed precisely at his temple. Luckily, Sunny was prepared for her. He sidestepped, raising his shadow tachi to intercept the training sword. The two blades met and bit into each other. Connected in a bind, he felt the shock of the impact travel through his bones and pushed the sword away. At the same moment as Morgan raised her hands, changing the angle of her weapon and pushing it forward over the tachi. The tip of the training sword barely missed his eye. But now, the momentum was on Sunny's side. He took a step forward, past their two blades, and rammed her with his shoulder. Morgan was thrown back, and a split second later, it was her turn to deflect a cut. Only the cut had never come. Instead of trying to twirl his tachi into a downward cut that was not too different from the one his opponent had delivered a moment ago, Sunny simply kept his position, raised above his shoulder, the blade facing back, and struck her in the face with the pommel. No matter how fast Morgan was, no matter how strong, the distance between them was too short, and that strike was too swift. Better yet, the blade of the tachi remained between his neck and the enemy's sword. Sunny saw no way for her to escape, and she didn't. Instead of awkwardly trying to avoid the strike, Morgan simply lowered her head and received it with the ridge of her brow where the bone was strongest. She didn't seem fazed by the powerful blow either. Sunny felt as if he had struck steel. He almost heard a metallic ring. The two of them pushed away from each other, ending that first probing exchange. Sunny was pleased with himself. Morgan seemed pleased too. A wide smile bloomed on her face. She briefly touched her forehead, then glanced at her fingers. Where a drop of blood was smeared across her alabaster skin, the smile turned into a grin. "Wonderful, simply wonderful. Nephis, Cassia, and you. I've been starved of good opponents for so long, and now there are 3. And you are all so different as well." She looked like a starving glutton who suddenly found herself choosing between 3 exquisite dishes. Sunny raised an eyebrow and glanced at the blind girl, who sat quietly by the wall of the dojo.
What? That battle maniac got Cassia involved in her training regime too?
Noticing his gaze, Morgan chuckled. "Cassia might not be the strongest master out there, but in terms of pure technique, she is among the best. And with how potent her precognition is, fighting her made me exercise skills and muscles that I had never had to exercise before, which is a rare boon for me. Why? Have the two of you never fought?" Sunny lingered for a moment, then shook his head.
No, not with swords at least.
Morgan gave him a curious look. "Ah, then it's your loss." She raised her sword and prepared to launch another strike. Her smile turned from charming to dangerous. "I won't hold back then." With that, Morgan attacked, turning into a furious whirlwind of steel.
Curses!
Sunny had been pleased with his performance in their first exchange, But his satisfaction quickly evaporated. Now that Morgan was done testing him, the onslaught of attacks she unleashed was simply unreasonable. In terms of raw physical strength and speed, the two of them were about equal. Granted, Sonny was only using 3 of his shadows to augment himself. He would have had an advantage if he used all 5. But then again, his enemy was probably holding something back too. In terms of technique, combat intelligence, and experience, to his deep dissatisfaction, Sonny realized that he was still inferior to the Princess of War in that regard. He had already known that Morgan's skill was near flawless, honed into a perfect tool by decades of practice and chilling killing intent. She was the epitome of what a legacy was supposed to be. A person born and raised for the sole purpose of being a fighter. The people who forged her into a deadly weapon were some of the best warriors humanity had to offer as well. Subjected to Morgan's inescapable sword, he felt suffocated. Back in the dreamscape, he had been simply crushed. He had felt as if his enemy was not a person, but a hurricane. The 36 seconds he had lasted against her seemed like a miracle. Today, the situation was different. Sonny was at a disadvantage, but he could confidently defend himself. He was older, stronger, and more experienced. His mastery of shadow dance had improved a lot too. Although Morgan's battle style was too sophisticated and strangely elusive to be absorbed by him in a short amount of time, he did manage to glean a few things about it, enough to be able to predict the general flow of her movements. However, that flow was flawless, entirely devoid of any vulnerability he could exploit. What was the point of knowing her moves in advance if he couldn't do anything about it? She fought in a way that left him with no choices. It was as though there was a steel cage around him, and its sharp bars were slowly constricting. Soon enough, he would be caught and cut into pieces by them. Sonny knew that if the enemy had no vulnerabilities, the best way to defeat them was to create some. So he tried to lure Morgan into several insidious traps, to no avail. She seemed to see straight through them, solving the puzzles he presented in an instant. Even all this time later, she was still like an insurmountable obstacle for him. The savage but simultaneously chilling, calculating deadliness of her perfectly lethal skill was like a work of art. Its theme was war, violence, and destruction. Sonny was both the subject and the sole member of the audience for whom that art was being created, as well as its victim. At that moment, Sonny realized that this was the worst possible way for him to fight someone like Morgan. Confrontation, contests of strength and skill, all of that was not his battlefield. The most dire battle Sonny had fought, he won with cunning and guile. He employed underhanded tricks, used every single resource available to him in unexpected ways, and tore victories from the claws of fate through sheer force of will and boundless spitefulness. He was good in a fight, of course, much better than most, but while being a sharp sword was an important conduit of his will, it was not what made him truly deadly.
What a fine realization.
The question was, how could he turn the stool around and push it toward a direction where he held the advantage? There were ways to overcome Morgan's furious, cold, suffocating might, surely. A more important question, though, was if he even wanted to. Up until now, both Sonny and Morgan had acted relatively tame. It might not have looked like it from the side, considering how fierce and vicious a battle of two Ascended inevitably appeared. Masters possessed superhuman speed, strength, and resilience. A clash between them would look like a collision of two natural forces to a mundane person, and a mundane building would be swiftly destroyed should it become an arena for it. This was why the dojo they were fighting in was lined with durable armored plates, and the training sword Morgan was using cost a fortune. Nevertheless, they were holding back. Not even because the two of them had agreed to forego using their Ascended abilities, Sunny had yet to make use of Shadow Step. Morgan had not made her weapon sharper either, preferring to rely on pure technique. It was as though both of them had silently decided to make this spar a contest of skill for now, which was a disadvantage for Sunny. The fewer resources he had at his disposal, the more restrained he felt. Morgan, on the other hand, seemed to only ever need one resource: her sword. Even that was not necessary. Her body itself was the sword, capable of cutting through tempered steel without hindrance. So, if Sunny wanted to turn things around, he needed the situation to change, pushing their duel into the next stage. However, he wasn't sure if he wanted to.
What is my goal here?
He had been curious to compare his strength with Morgan's. He had been given little choice but to accept her request as well. He naturally wanted to win, but was a victory really in his best interest? Now that Sunny was being closely observed by the great clans, there was no possibility of not drawing their attention. This was why he had decided to accept the fact and settle for creating a very specific impression of himself instead of trying to remain unseen. Sunny wanted both Valor and Song to think of him as someone strong, exceptional even, but not too exceptional and not too strong. They had to think of him as a powerful but crude upstart, a talented outskirt rat that had achieved a lot and had the potential to achieve even more, but not much more. As someone who could be predicted and controlled. Considering all that, did he want to defeat Morgan? Could he even defeat her?
Well, of course I can.
Saint, Nightmare, Imp, and Serpent were all part of his power. Morgan possessed a great number of mighty echoes, but those had come from outside her aspect. The shadows, on the contrary, had come from within Sunny's. This meant that he would obliterate her in a contest of unadulterated personal power, which did not matter since such contests never happened in real life. There were always other components involved. The transcendent echoes might have been external to Morgan's power, but they would rip Sunny apart just as well.
No, I don't want to beat Morgan today. What I need to do is lose in a way that will make it easier for me to gain access to her secrets. So, lose in a way that would leave her wanting for more.
Being a personal sparring partner of the heir of the great clan Valor was a dangerous position to be in. Not the least because Morgan could potentially learn much more about Sunny than he would have liked her to. But it was also the best position to be in for a spy. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Sunny frowned for a moment.
Isn't this the same reasoning Nephis used to justify her decision to join Valor?
Maybe it was, but he did not care. Many things had changed since then, including Sunny himself and the situation he was in.
All right then, let's do this,
he thought to himself with resolve. He deflected another of Morgan's blows, evaded her follow-up strike, 3 of them all chained into one predatory fluid motion, and raised an eyebrow.
Should we take it up a notch?
She took a step forward, sent her sword flying toward his throat with diabolical speed, and smiled pleasantly.
Let's.
Sunny sidestepped her strike and nodded. Then, his technique instantly changed. Before, he was using a fluid mix of various simple styles he had picked up over the years. Such a patchwork technique did not excel in any one thing in particular, but was flexible and hard to predict. Sunny had held to his best cards, though, unwilling to share them with a potential enemy at least. Broken sword style that Nephis had taught him, Saint's grounded technique that had originated from the legions of Nether, the battle art of Solvain's zealots, which had come from the war maidens of the Red Sect, those he had hidden within himself.
What would intrigue a battle maniac like Morgan?
He wondered. She had faced and defeated all kinds of Awakened, and had learned all manner of battle styles, no doubt. Her collection was probably even larger than Sunny's own. So what technique could he show that was both exceptional and fascinating? And most importantly, unknown to Morgan. One particular style came to mind. It was one that he had learned by chance, not from awakened, ascended, or even saints, but from nightmare creatures, the primeval hunters that had emerged from the gate near Rain's school, wielding weapons made of flint. After all, if anything could capture the attention of an obsessed connoisseur of swordsmanship and all things related to combat, like Morgan, it was a technique that might have just lain at the root of all techniques and styles. Sunny's movements changed, shifting from fluid and refined to uncomplicated and brutal. His whole demeanor changed too. The savage technique of the barrel wraiths was straightforward and rudimentary, but there was a primal lethality to its clear, callous barbarity. It was the expression of pure, unclouded intent to kill. Simple, but in no way crude. There was nothing about it to dilute the ruthless resolve of a hunter who sought to slaughter his prey in the most direct, efficient way possible. Sunny remembered the desperate fight in front of the Nightmare Gate and attacked, cruelly aiming to slice through Morgan's hamstrings.
Let's see how this goes.
It went well. Sunny was not doing much better against the murderous hurricane of steel, wearing the beautiful human face of Morgan of Valor, but he did manage to slow her down a little. Morgan slowed down not because she felt pressured by his sudden change of techniques, but because she was fascinated by it. Her raven black hair swept back and her simple tunic, rippling from the wind raised by their clash. She pierced him with a burning vermilion gaze. Her red lips moved. Interesting. Very interesting. Morgan was not addressing Sunny, but more so speaking to herself. After that, she changed her strategy as well. Before, Morgan was all offense, all sharp edges, and a relentless barrage of calculated but devastating strikes. Now, she was moving more deliberately, not holding back, but also not pursuing an overwhelming defeat of the enemy at all costs. It was as if Morgan was afraid to break him too soon. Sunny did not know how to feel about that.
Well, that's a new feeling.
They clashed, their swords weaving a cacophonous but strangely beautiful melody of hissing and clangor. At the side of the dojo, Cassia turned her head slightly, listening. Sunny had long beaten his record of holding out against Morgan for 36 seconds. A minute passed, then another. He was still solidly standing on his 2 feet, and even though his breathing was growing a little labored from the terrible strain of the intense fight, his stamina was far from running out. In the middle of a particularly furious exchange, when they were close to each other, Morgan suddenly asked, "That style, who taught it to you?" Sunny struck at the hilt of her sword, aiming to sever her fingers, and answered hoarsely,
"No one taught me. I learned it from a nightmare creature."
She easily avoided his strike and punished it by aiming a thrust at his heart. A smile appeared on her face. "In the nightmare?" Sunny hesitated, considering how much he could reveal. He had fought the barrel wraiths as mongrel after all, but then again, no one else had gotten a proper measure of their battle skill. And he had faced countless nightmare gates later in Antarctica, most of them undocumented.
"No, in front of a nightmare gate."
Morgan's smile widened. "You're a fast learner then." She seemed to have gotten a good grasp on the essence of the primal battle style he was using, which translated into her attacks becoming more purposeful. She was probing and testing, forcing him to reveal more facets of the technique, all of them ideally, which did not quite suit Sunny. It was too soon. He could not have her growing bored yet. He needed to impress her some more before losing, so that the impression he made lasted. Without giving Morgan any warning, he commanded his Shadow Tachi to change in the middle of a swing. The shadow flowed, turning into a great Jian. It was still a two-handed sword, but this one was straight and double-edged, much more suitable for thrusts, slightly more versatile, and supremely mobile. The swing staggered unexpectedly and turned into a thrust, catching Morgan by surprise. She moved with the grace of a dancer, pulling her head out of the way. A strand of wavy black hair was cut and glided through the air.
Devious.
Despite the outraged tone, her vibrant eyes were shining with excitement. Technically, Sunny had just cheated. They had agreed to leave their ascended abilities unused after all. But that was fine. Cheating was exactly what an exalted legacy would expect an outskirt rat to do. And honestly, it was also what a person from the outskirts would do. It was also what a fighter in a real battle would not shy away from, which was why Sunny thought that Morgan was bound to enjoy his little twist. Instead of answering, he attacked, turning his Jian into a spear. There were a few weapon forms that he had trained to create well enough to summon them on the fly. The only one he had reasons to avoid was the Odachi, since that was what he had used the last time he fought Morgan. Her smile grew wider. They fought, putting the armored plates of the dojo under more and more strain. At some point, one of them even started to crack. Sunny used it to his advantage, launching a deliberate strike while his opponent was slightly less sure-footed. Pushing the tip of the spear aside, Morgan pivoted, shifting her weight to one leg. The other suddenly whipped into the air, delivering a lightning-fast, picture-perfect roundhouse kick to his head. Sunny barely had time to react, pulling the spear slightly back and raising its butt to solidly block the kick with the shaft. Morgan's alabaster skin connected with the matte black surface of the shadow spear and cut straight through it, as if it was not as strong as an ascended weapon would be. Sunny's eyes widened slightly. Crap! It seemed that Morgan had decided to start using more of her aspect abilities as well. There was nothing really for him to do but accept the blow and hope that she was not planning to decapitate him. The kick had lost none of its power after cutting through the spear. The moment Morgan's foot connected with his jaw, it was as if he had been hit by a siege ram. Sunny momentarily saw stars. He was thrown aside and staggered, barely managing to maintain some semblance of balance. Not good. No, actually, very good. This is exactly what I wanted. Time to be defeated. He overplayed his disorientation a little and waited for the follow-up strike to come. But it didn't. When Sunny regained the ability to see clearly a second later, he saw a hint of guilt on Morgan's face. She was looking at him with a resigned expression.
Damn it. Sorry, I forgot myself for a moment. I have a healer at hand.
Then she paused and stared at him with a slightly startled expression. It was strange to see Morgan surprised.
You're not cut.
Sunny rubbed his cheek, which was still numb. He was going to have a nasty bruise, that was for sure. But the marble shell seemed to have withstood Morgan's aspect ability. No, not quite. She had probably released the ability after slicing through the spear. But her flaw, what Sunny suspected to be her flaw, remained. He grimaced, then moved his jaw side to side and answered in an even tone. No. Why would I be cut? Do I look fragile? Well, I'm not. I'm quite sturdy. Morgan stared at him for a bit, a strange expression on her face. Eventually, her lips twisted into a light smile.
That you are. I'll remember that for our next spar. This one, sadly, has come to an end. Thank you for a wonderful duel, Master Sunlith.
She glanced at her training sword, then calmly turned around and went to place it back in the case. Sonny rubbed his cheek again, feeling a bit of dull pain seep through the numbness, and looked at her back.
Seems like it worked. This is what I call a job well done. Beautifully, really. I guess that is what they call suffering from success.
The spar with Morgan left Sonny feeling sore and contemplative. The soreness quickly dissipated thanks to his ascended physique and the shroud of dusk, but the ponderous mood remained. Sometime later, he was sitting in his small office, ignoring the paperwork he had to fill out, in favor of idly staring at the wall. That fight of theirs was not exactly illuminating, but it had provided him with a lot of food for thought. First of all, Sonny was reminded of what true legacies represented. Over the years, he had forgotten the feeling of awe and reverence mundane people had toward the distant, powerful legacy clans. The austere warrior caste that produced the best and most valiant champions of humanity, that existed solely for battling the nightmare spell, or was supposed to at least. He couldn't be blamed. Sonny had grown immensely strong himself and had crossed paths with all kinds of powerful creatures, from ancient saints to titans. He had even brushed against actual divinities like Weaver, Nether, and Hope. It was not surprising that the fearsome reputation of the legacies faded a bit in comparison. But the legacy clans, and especially the three great clans, were still authorities in terms of personal power and combat prowess. They were in no way inferior to the ancient awakened of the past, and seemed to be superior in many ways. Legacies, and all modern awakened by extension, were much harsher, much more extreme, and much better tempered than those from ancient times. That was because the legacy clans were forged in a much more hellish world. They had risen to resist the nightmare spell, and were shaped into a force to be reckoned with by its terrible pressure. Morgan had reminded Sonny about that. It was no coincidence that the two most dangerous people he knew, Nephis and Mordred, were productions of the legacy culture. Among the three of them, it was Sonny who was an outlier, which brought him to the second avenue of thought, his power. Sonny would have lied to himself if he said that he wasn't upset about his loss, even though he understood that a good defeat was much more beneficial as far as his goals were concerned. A small and unreasonable part of his mind still desired to win. No one liked to lose, and Sonny especially hated the thought of losing to a member of a great clan. He deeply resented them, after all. Being defeated by someone he disdained was a bitter pill to swallow. But swallow it he did. It was one thing to pretend to be weak in front of Morgan, but the truth of the matter was that she was simply too strong. Even the current Sonny, with all his advantages, would find it hard to contend with that level of strength in a confrontation. And while he was resourceful and had ways of avoiding such a confrontation, Morgan had all the boundless resources of clan valor behind her as well. So, even in that regard, she was a dire threat. Sonny remembered what Jet had told him once, years ago.
No one survives in the dream realm alone.
Her words had always held, but now they seemed especially poignant. Sonny had grown powerful, much more powerful than he ever imagined being. But he was still just one man. In front of a collective like a great clan, his power seemed insignificant. Worse still, that collective served as a gatekeeper to greater strength. No one could even become a saint without their permission, unless that person wanted to be hunted down and slain in retaliation for their defiance. There were ways to grow more powerful without achieving transcendence, though. The last thing the spar with Morgan had made Sonny think about was the duel itself. He slowly replayed it in his mind, considering what he could have done better and what mistakes he could have avoided. The list was both endless and pointless. Everything was easier in hindsight. It was achieving the best result at the hard moment. Still, it was good to review his performance, as well as that of his enemy. Sonny spent some time staring at the wall and thinking back to his duel.
A Jian was not a good choice for that strike. Here, I did not need to saturate that group of muscles with essence. It was just a waste. Should have anticipated the effect of the kick better.
As he analyzed their fight, his thoughts inevitably drifted to what could have been done differently.
I wonder how Morgan would have fared against me if I used the Shadow Shell.
Sonny tried to construct such a fight in his mind, replacing himself with a version that was 3 meters high and possessed 4 arms. Would Morgan have still held an advantage? Not in physical prowess, that was for sure. However, he was still not certain if the outcome would have been different. Legacies were first and foremost abomination slayers after all. Anvil's daughter had been trained to face all kinds of nightmare creatures since childhood. A 4-armed fiend would not faze her at all.
What about some other shell?
Sonny was currently limited to one form, that of the Shadow Spawn, because that was what he knew best. But in theory, he could create the shell of any creature. He just needed to know the creature well enough, perfectly. And that was not easy to achieve. A thoughtful frown appeared on his face.
Is it true, though, that I can create the shell of any creature?
It was true in theory, but that theory broke instantly when faced with reality. Take Morgan, for example, or any other human for that matter. Creating a shell of a human had to be easier because Sonny was one himself and knew how human bodies operated perfectly well. But how would that even work? The Shadow Spawn shell worked because the 4-armed fiend was much larger than Sonny, and thus he could form its body around his own. But other humans, with rare exceptions, were more or less the same approximate size as him. There was no space for a human shell to be formed. There were creatures smaller than humans, too. The current ravenous fiend, for example. Even if Sonny studied his shadow for a while, he wouldn't be able to create a shell of the little critter. So in reality, the shadow shell was limited in what it could recreate. A strange expression suddenly appeared on Sonny's face. He blinked a couple of times.
Unless...
Sonny remained motionless for a while, then chuckled.
No, that's crazy. It would never work.
Then he stared at the wall some more. Would it?
No way.
The thought that had crept into his mind while he was thinking about the limitations of the shadow shell was so out there that it seemed utterly ridiculous. But the more he thought about it, the fewer reasons to discard it he saw.
No, that's a bit too strange, even for me.
And yet, he could not find a logical reason for why it wouldn't be true. Sonny hesitated for a while longer, then furtively looked around. Then he cleared his throat, stood up, and left the office. If he wanted to test this bizarre theory, he needed to do it somewhere more private. He left the Valor compound and made his way to the nearby dormitory, where most of the government staff still remaining within the siege capital lived. There, he entered his living quarters, which were a bit more spacious and had better amenities than that of both mundane and awakened government workers, and locked the door behind him. Being an Ascended had its perks. Sonny sent his 4 shadows to stand watch, 2 outside the apartment, 2 within, and stood there for a few minutes, mentally going over what he was about to do. It didn't seem to be dangerous, just weird. The principle was simple. Sonny had mastered 3 steps of shadow dance to date. The essence of his battle art was shapelessness and formlessness. It allowed him to shadow an enemy, copying the very essence of their combat technique. After doing so, he could predict their movements, the flow of their battle intent, and even their thoughts. The first step allowed him to shadow simpler battle styles. He had achieved that breakthrough while fighting Nephis in the Crimson Spire. The second step vastly elevated his comprehension of the fundamental principles that governed all battle techniques, allowing him to shadow much more sophisticated styles and do it much faster. It also gave him a glimpse of an intuitive understanding of the more esoteric components of the truly advanced battle arts, those created and used by the Awakened, thus incorporating special ways of guiding soul essence through one's body. He had achieved that step after collecting a vast library of techniques in the dreamscape, which culminated during his first duel with Morgan. The inspiration Sonny had received after being decimated by the Priestess of War pushed him to a breakthrough. The third step was the hardest one yet. Sonny had started his journey toward the mastery of it by expanding his horizons and starting to shadow not only humans, but also nightmare creatures in the bloody arena of the Red Colosseum. He had submerged himself into their perverted, demented, rabid minds, which allowed him to intuitively feel what the abominations he fought would do, but also put his own sense of self, if not his very soul, at risk. The third step of Shadow Dance was much more demanding on the practitioner. It required one to truly accept the formless nature of the shadows and let go of their actual self, which of course posed the risk of losing it forever. Sonny had made that dangerous breakthrough after being trapped in an endless procession of harrowing dreams by Nightmare and having his personal memories blocked. In the end, he had pulled the dissipating pieces of his true self back together by using his true name. It served as an anchor for what made Sonny an individual, and through it, he was able to advance his mastery of Shadow Dance without losing himself. That third breakthrough enhanced the speed with which he could comprehend the battle intent and combat intelligence of those beings he shadowed even further, allowing him to actually perceive the flow of essence through their bodies, as opposed to just feeling it intuitively, and even gave him the ability to sometimes predict their thoughts. The fourth step, that was where Sonny had hit the wall. Shadow Dance was his aspect legacy, but it was also something he had to invent all on his own, with no one guiding him. As such, he wasn't even sure what the correct path was, let alone how to reach the next step on it. He only felt that the next steps of Shadow Dance went far beyond battle techniques and would be much, much harder to conceive and master for that reason. However, while he had stagnated in mastering Shadow Dance, he had achieved progress in other aspects of his power. The culmination of it was the Shadow Shell, a powerful tool he had created by bringing together various facets of his skills, attributes, and aspect abilities. Shadow Dance also played a role in him being able to create shells of other creatures. Its role was perhaps the most important. Without deep comprehension of the desired form, Sonny would never be able to construct it from the shadows, and that was what his aspect legacy allowed him to do. However, there was a limitation to Shadow Shell. After all, shadows were truly shapeless and formless, while Sonny was not. Even if he managed to make his mind supremely malleable, he still possessed a human body. No matter how much training he had put into making it as flexible and adaptable as possible, it was still a relatively rigid thing. But what if he added another ingredient to the mix? Right now, Shadow Shell existed as a combination of his dormant ability, Shadow Control, his ascended ability, Shadow Manifestation, and his aspect legacy, Shadow Dance. His awakened ability, Shadow Step, was missing from the equation. And that, perhaps, was the reason for the limitations Sonny had to deal with.
Well, let's try this.
If he succeeded, Sonny felt that he might just discover a direction that would eventually lead him to the next steps of Shadow Dance. Breathing in deeply, he activated Shadow Step and dissolved into the shadows. There, in their dark embrace, Sonny himself was a shadow, formless and shapeless. But he did not need to be. While fighting the ravenous fiend, he had changed form in this state to possess sharp claws. His shadow form was, too, infinitely malleable. So, Sonny concentrated and started to slowly change his shadow form into the shape of himself. It was a strange endeavor to turn himself into a shadow, only then to turn the shadow into himself. But that was exactly what Sonny wanted to do. It was a bit like constructing the shell of the shadow spawn, only instead of shaping the shadows around his body, Sonny was shaping his body, his shadow body, instead. Of course, he knew the shape of himself the best. This was why recreating it was much easier than summoning the fiendish form of the shadow spawn. Eventually, the incorporeal shadow assumed the form of Sonny's body. It had arms and legs, a torso, fingers, and toes, and a face that was a perfect rendition of Sonny's face. It matched his physical body perfectly. Not that it needed to. Starting from becoming himself was just the easiest thing he could do for that test. Satisfied with the result of the shaping, Sonny spent some time in the dark embrace of the shadows, drifting. I wonder. Then he took a deep mental breath, activated shadow manifestation, and manifested himself back into the waking world through it. A matte jet-black version of Sonny was standing in the middle of the room. He did not move for a while, frozen like a statue, then raised his hands slightly and looked at them with a strange expression. His fingers moved. Well, that's... The jet-black Sonny scratched the back of his head, then halted for a moment and tentatively touched his hair. The mere fact that he had hair was a surprise. That's certainly something. He felt extremely strange. Sonny was fundamentally a human, so using Shadow Step, he could assume the form of an incorporeal shadow, then turn himself back into his original form. That was not what he had done today, however. Today, he had become a shadow and then manifested himself into a corporeal form without turning back into a human. I'll be damned if I know what I am right now. A human inhabiting a human-shaped vessel made of shadows? A shadow brazenly wandering the human world in the form of a person? Or something else entirely? Descriptions aside, his current state was a curious one. Because of how faithful the recreation was to the original, Sonny felt more or less like himself. His range of motion, strength, and agility remained the same. His shadow form was ascended, just like his human body. So it was just as powerful and resilient. There were differences too, of course. The most obvious one was the change in his perception. His shadow sense seemed to have become sharper, while his vision was now less pronounced. He couldn't see colors either, just like in the second nightmare when inhabiting the shadow spawn. This was familiar territory for him. Less familiar was the actual composition of his new and strange shadow body. It was a faithful copy, but not an exact one. It couldn't be. Although the jet-black Sonny looked and acted like Sonny, he was still a manifested shadow. As such, he operated on a different set of principles. The recreation did follow some underlying principles of how a corporeal creature was supposed to be, but the similarity was shallow. He did not have a beating heart or any internal organs for that matter, although there was a rough structure to his form, with something similar to bones being connected to similar muscles. There was no blood running through his veins. There were no veins either. At best, there were essence pathways. How did it all work? Hell if Sonny knew. It did work, though. Perplexed, he glanced at the two shadows that were hiding in the corners of the room. What do you guys think? The haughty shadow seemed completely befuddled. It stared at him for a while, then raised a hand as if wanting to say something. Eventually, though, the arrogant guy simply shook his head in confusion. The creepy shadow, in an uncharacteristic display of emotions, scratched the back of its head, puzzled. The jet-black Sunny smiled, revealing jet-black teeth.
Yeah.
After going through the training steps of Shadow Dance and examining his current state further, he discovered a few things. The first was that this corporeal shadow form was much more malleable than his human body. It could change its shape at will. Of course, he needed to possess an excellent understanding of what he was turning it into for the end result to work. For example, Sunny could become a smaller version of himself. That, however, required some practice to master, since such a fundamental change affected a lot of things. He could become larger, too, although there was a limit to how much, dictated by his rank and soul essence capacity. Less comprehensive changes were much easier. Sunny already knew how to possess 4 arms, so he could add 2 more to his existing ones with ease. The same went for claws, horns, and a tail. In the future, as his knowledge of various forms and shapes grew, he would be able to make more changes like that on the fly. The second discovery was that while the corporeal shadow form was almost as resilient as his actual body, in the end, it still fell short. The reason for that was simple: the weaves. Neither blood weave nor bone weave persisted in this state, which left Sunny vulnerable. Interestingly enough, the marble shell still had an effect. In fact, it had even become more potent. That was because the effects of the stalwart trait were being applied to him twice. Shadows were innately connected to souls, to the extent that when Sunny was damaged in the form of a shadow, or one of his shadows was damaged, his soul would be damaged too. Therefore, the corporeal shadow form received the benefits of both the extremely high degree of physical protection and the high degree of protection from soul attacks that the stalwart trait provided, because every attack against it was akin to a soul attack, which was not ideal. Sunny tended to be wounded a lot, and if each wound was transferred directly to his soul, it would quickly collapse.
No, that really won't do.
Activating the mantle would surround the physical shadow form with an onyx carapace and make it much less prone to being damaged. But there was an even better solution. After all, Sunny had started this whole experiment for a reason. Even though the discovery promised to have much wider implications, the initial reason was to expand the limits of the shadow shell. After getting somewhat used to this new way of existence, Sunny called upon the deep shadows surrounding the room, manifesting them into the shadow spawn shell. Layers of shadows flowed up his jet-black body, wrapping tightly around it. Soon, a towering, 4-armed fiend was standing in the middle of the room. This time felt different, though. Instead of being nestled within the shell, Sunny felt as if he had become an integral part of it. His own shadow form was still the heart and driving force of the horned creature, but it was as if he had actually become the fiend. The outer layers of the shadow spawn were like armor, and protected safely deep within was his vulnerable soul.
Not bad.
Combining these two abilities was a perfect way to both remove the limitations of the shadow shell and protect his soul from harm. If there was one negative side to this solution, though, it was that Sunny's essence was being consumed at twice the speed. He would not be able to sustain this double transformation for long. For now. In the future, though, as his soul grew more powerful, Sunny would most likely be able to use these abilities much better, and one day, perhaps, his soul would grow so vast and powerful that he would not need the protection of a shell at all. A few days went by in a flash. Nothing serious seemed to have happened, but grand and dire events were being set in motion in the shadows. Saint Matic had transported several cohorts of Valor retainers into the Dream Realm and then disappeared. Of course, no one was told about his absence. In fact, Clan Valor made a good show of pretending that he was still around, supporting the Awakened in the Dream Realm. It was a believable lie. Awakened, Ascended, and Saints were affected by the call all the same. If they traveled to the Dream Realm near a Nightmare Gate, they would be brought to the area surrounding the seed, instead of to where their anchor was. However, there was a big difference when a transcendent was actually involved. That difference was that saints could return to the waking world by just using their innate powers, while awakened and masters needed to find a gateway to come back. Another, no less important distinction was that the pull of the call was not precise. If an awakened fell asleep near a gate, they could be transported right to where the seed was, but just as easily to a spot dozens of kilometers away. They could even be dropped right into the middle of a horde of hungry nightmare creatures. So if a cohort of awakened wanted to use a nightmare gate as a pathway to the dream realm, they would be scattered over a large area and risk finding their doom long before reuniting with their fellow warriors. A saint could follow the call first, establish an anchor in a safe place, and then transport the members of the cohort there, one by one. A saint could even clear the way to the seed if the cohort was truly planning to challenge it. That was how the nightmare gates that opened inside the human cities were usually dealt with, unless there was no one to challenge them. In that case, they were simply contained, surrounded by a fortified exclusion zone, and guarded day and night. So everyone had been led to believe that that was exactly what Whispering Blade was doing, guiding the awakened warriors of Clan Valor to the seeds of nightmare in order to conquer them. Sunny, however, knew better. He knew that Matic actually left to infiltrate Song's territory and secretly take out Mordred. The awakened cohorts the fearsome saint had transported to the Dream Realm had been left to their own devices, presumably supporting Knight Stad in pursuing a mysterious objective. The war between the great clans was starting in earnest. Blood had already been spilled, and much more of it was going to flow very soon. Sunny himself, meanwhile, had spent these days experimenting with his newfound ability. He was in a real rush of excitement about it, simply because the potential of the corporeal shadow form was all but limitless, in theory. In practice, there were still conditions to what he could do with it. For example, Sunny managed to turn himself into the Shadow Fiend without the help of the Shadow Shell, relying solely on his own form. That was more or less the extent of how large he could make himself, though, for now. It was also an inferior solution to calling upon the ambient shadows to become the outer layer of the spawn, since he was vulnerable without them. He also experimented with becoming smaller. That was a much easier change, although not without its limitations either. The smallest he managed to become was about the size of the imp, which induced quite a reaction from the little wretch. Sunny also tried other things, like staying more or less his natural size, but changing various aspects of his appearance. Facial features were easy to shift around, as were other things like the length of his hair, his body type, and so on. It would have been a great subterfuge tool if not for the fact that all these permutations were still of a matte jet black color. I won't be masquerading as other people anytime soon. Of course, his experiments went beyond cosmetic changes. His interest was mostly combat and stealth, after all. So Sunny started by adding 2 more arms to the corporeal shadow form, and transitioned to more extreme shape alterations from there. His ability to shapeshift was limited by his knowledge and experience. Sunny did well with smaller alterations like adding sharp claws to his fingers or turning his teeth into wicked fangs. However, when he tried to grow wings, the result was borderline disastrous. He had never lived with wings on his back, did not know their anatomy and how it engaged with the rest of the body, and had the vaguest understanding of the principles of flight. So, he had no hope of soaring into the sky like Kai or St. Tyrus anytime soon. Sunny was far away from becoming truly shapeless and formless. He did come closer to reaching that goal, though. The funniest thing he did, however, was fulfill his old desire to become taller. Granted, it too was not easy. When Sunny simply made himself larger, the proportions of his body seemed a bit off. When he elongated his limbs, the result was even more off-putting. Finding the right balance was really hard. He did manage to achieve an acceptable result, though, and was currently looking at himself through one of the shadows, giggling. Damn, it's such a pity Effie can't see me right now.
The look on her face would be priceless, especially since she would be looking up at me. Oh gods, I can just imagine it.
The tall version of Sunny was really weird. He wasn't sure that he liked its lanky silhouette that much. It was really amusing to see, though, especially because the corporeal shadow form was entirely matte black, except for the hair. His hair was actually white, because Sunny had summoned the autumn leaf to see if it worked on him in that state.
I should probably explore purchasing more cosmetic memories in the future. They seem to be working on this form, which can be of use.
He glanced at himself one last time, then dove back into the shadows and emerged from them in his usual human form. Truth be told, while being a manifested shadow was certainly fun, he felt much more comfortable in his real body. It was nice, cozy, and familiar. He felt really rather attached to it. Sometime later, Sunny was preparing to go to sleep, but then suddenly froze in the middle of washing up. His face grew cold and dark. Then a dangerous smile appeared on his lips.
Well, what do we have here?
A frightening darkness flooded his eyes. That was because a few moments ago, Sunny had felt something. Before, his perception had been split between 5 points of view, his own and those of his 4 shadows. But then a 6th perspective slowly came into focus, which meant that the 5th shadow had returned. The gloomy shadow was now within the walls of the siege capital, and that meant that the assassins Clan Song had sent were here too.